At 3,200 meters above the rest of the world, the air on the Tibetan Plateau becomes incredibly thin. To breathe up here requires a slow, deliberate rhythm. It asks for a deep drawing in of the freezing night air, a moment of quiet suspension in the lungs, and a slow, effortless release. It is a place that forces the human body to adopt the pacing of the mountains themselves. Slow, patient, enduring. In the depths of winter, the Ganges Basin in Shire County becomes a landscape painted entirely in shades of white and slate grey. The wind sweeping across the vast, treeless steppes carries with it a profound silence, a quiet that is so absolute, so heavy, that it feels almost like a physical blanket resting over the earth. If you were to stand there, looking out over the frozen grasses, you would hear nothing but the steady, rhythmic sound of your own breathing and the muffled crunch of frost shifting beneath your boots. It is the winter of 1980. The sky above is a pale, bruised purple, heavy with the promise of more snow. At the edge of the basin, rising up from the earth like a great, slumbering giant, is a sheer limestone cliff face, and carved into the side of this ancient stone is a massive, dark opening. This is the mouth of the Baishiya Karst Cave. For centuries it has been a sanctuary, a sacred pilgrimage site for Tibetan Buddhists, who believe these deep caverns are the earthly dwelling place of divine beings. It is a place where the barrier between the physical world and the spiritual world is said to be as thin as the mountain air. Walking toward that black, gaping entrance is a single figure. He is a Buddhist monk, wrapped tightly in heavy, dark maroon wool. The fabric is thick, woven to withstand the biting cold of the plateau, and it absorbs the sound of the wind, making his silhouette seem soft and blurred against the sharp edges of the landscape. He is not in a hurry. Up here, rushing is a foolish endeavor. He places one foot in front of the other with practiced intention, his leather boots pressing softly into the fresh, powdery snow. With every step, he leaves a temporary mark on the earth, a shallow impression that the wind will gently erase within the hour. He is walking toward the cave not to find history, but to seek silence. In the chaotic, shifting world of the 20th century, the Baishiya Karst Cave offers something increasingly rare absolute, unbroken stillness. He reaches the threshold of the cave, where the white snow gives way to dry, pale dust. The transition is immediate. As he steps out of the wind and into the shelter of the stone, the acoustics of the world change. The howling of the winter plateau is instantly muffled, cut off by thousands of tons of ancient limestone. Inside the cave mouth, the air is perfectly still. It is deeply cold, a kind of ancient chill that radiates from the rock itself, but it is calm. It is a safe cold. The cavern stretches back into the mountain, a sprawling network of chambers and tunnels that wind their way into absolute darkness. The monk does not need to go far. He knows this place well. He walks a short distance into the main chamber, his eyes slowly adjusting to the profound absence of light. The floor beneath his feet is not rough stone, but a soft, powdery sediment. It is a fine, silty earth, composed of thousands of years of dust blowing in from the steppes, mixed with the ash of centuries of campfires and the soft decay of time itself. It yields under his weight like a heavy, dusty carpet. He finds his place near the wall, in a small alcove where the stone curves inward like a protective hand. Slowly and methodically, he reaches into the deep folds of his robes. He withdraws a small, brass bowl, heavy and cold to the touch. Inside it rests a solid block of yak butter, a traditional fuel used in monasteries across the Himalayas. From another pocket, he produces a small piece of flint and steel. The sound of the flint striking is sharp but small, a tiny spark of life in the overwhelming dark. Once, twice. On the third strike, a tiny ember catches on the cotton wick resting in the butter. The flame blooms. It is a soft, flickering amber light, casting long, slow-moving shadows against the cavern walls. The light is warm, radiating a gentle golden hue that paints the monk's face in soft relief. As the butter begins to melt, it releases a heavy and rich, earthy scent into the air. It is a smell of profound comfort, a fragrance that has filled these mountain sanctuaries for over 1,000 years. It smells of devotion, of warmth, of safety against the long night. The monk carefully sets the brass lamp on the dusty floor in front of him. He arranges his robes, folding his legs beneath him, settling into the lotus position. He rests his hands gently on his knees, palms facing upward. He closes his eyes, and then he begins to breathe. Draw the cold air in, let it fill the chest, hold it in the quiet space of the lungs, and then let it go. With every exhalation, his heartbeat slows. The tension of the freezing walk bleeds out of his muscles, sinking down into the soft earth beneath him. Time begins to lose its sharp edges. In the deep silence of the Baishiya Karst Cave, minutes and hours blend together into a single, continuous moment. The only movement in the world is the slow rise and fall of his chest, and the hypnotic, rhythmic flickering of the butter lamp, casting its warm amber glow against the ancient limestone. It is easy to forget the physical world when you are anchored so deeply in the present. The monk sits for a long time. The cave is totally silent, save for the incredibly faint, muffled sound of the wind storming hopelessly outside the stone walls. Inside there is only peace. As his meditation deepens, his posture naturally relaxes. His hands, previously resting lightly on his knees, slide slowly downward, coming to rest on the cold, powdery floor of the cave. His fingertips brush against the fine sediment. The dust is soft, finer than sand, worn down by millennia of dry air and passing footsteps. He does not open his eyes. He simply allows his senses to exist in the tips of his fingers, feeling the texture of the earth, connecting himself physically to the mountain. He traces small, slow circles in the dust. The earth is freezing, but it is a grounding sensation. It reminds him that he is here, anchored to the physical realm, even as his mind drifts toward the ethereal. But as his right hand sweeps gently across the cave floor, brushing away a top layer of soft silt, his fingers encounter something solid. It is not a loose pebble. It does not feel like the jagged, broken fragments of limestone that occasionally flake off from the cave ceiling. It has a different texture. Even through the numbing cold of his fingertips, he can feel that the surface is strangely smooth in some places and oddly textured in others. It is deeply embedded in the earth, as if the dust itself has grown around it over an impossible stretch of time. Still keeping his breathing slow and steady, the monk opens his eyes. He leans forward slightly, the heavy wool of his robes shifting against the stone. He brings the small brass butter lamp closer, allowing the golden light to spill over the patch of earth his hand rests upon. Half buried in the grey dust, covered in a thick, pale crust of minerals, is a shape. Gently, with the utmost care and reverence, he begins to brush the dirt away. He uses his thumbs, working slowly, honouring the stillness of the cave. The dust gives way easily, falling away like dry snow. As he digs his fingers slightly deeper to grip the object, he is surprised by the sheer weight of it. When he finally pulls it free from the floor of the cavern, it feels incredibly dense, far heavier than any ordinary stone of its size. He holds it up to the warm light of the butter lamp. It is a piece of bone, but it is unlike any bone he has ever seen. It is heavily fossilized, turned entirely to stone by the slow, relentless alchemy of the earth. It is the right half of a jawbone, but the proportions are strange. It is massive, incredibly thick and robust, far larger and heavier than the jaw of any modern man. And resting within the heavy curve of the bone are two enormous teeth. They are deeply rooted and wide, and heavily worn down, caked in a hard, white carbonate crust that looks like frozen frost. The monk does not feel fear. In the soft, amber light of his sanctuary, holding this piece of the deep past, he feels only a profound, quiet wonder. He does not know what he is holding. He does not know the words Pleistocene or hominin or Denisovan. He does not know that this heavy piece of stone is 160,000 years old. He does not know that it is one of the most important archaeological discoveries in the history of human science, quietly resting in the palms of his hands. To him, it is simply a relic of the mountain, a piece of the earth that once lived. In Tibetan Buddhism, there is a deep understanding of impermanence, of the cycle of life and death, and return to the soil. To hold the ancient bones of someone who walked these mountains long before memory is not a macabre experience, it is a humbling one. It is a reminder of the vast, unending river of time. He holds the jawbone for a long time, running his thumbs slowly over the smooth, petrified curve of the bone, feeling the heavy, worn enamel of the ancient teeth. He imagines the life of the being who left it here. Who were they? Did they sit in this exact same spot, seeking shelter from the bitter wind? Did they look out at the same snow-covered peaks of the Ganges basin? Did they listen to the same deep silence of the cave? The connection he feels in this moment is invisible, yet undeniably powerful. Across a chasm of 160 millennia, two human ancestors are occupying the exact same space. The air the monk is slowly drawing into his lungs is the very same air that once filled the deep, heavy chest of the Denisovan whose remains he now holds. The mountain has kept this secret safe, perfectly preserved in the freezing, dry dust, waiting for the precise moment when a quiet man would brush away the earth. The butter lamp continues to burn, its golden light steadfast against the pressing dark. The monk knows he cannot simply leave the jawbone here, exposed on the surface of the dust. It feels important. It feels heavy with a meaning he cannot yet decipher, but respects nonetheless. Carefully, he reaches into the thick folds of his maroon robes. He finds a clean piece of woven wool, a scrap of fabric meant for the bitterest cold. With gentle, deliberate motions, he wraps the ancient jawbone in the cloth. He swaddles it like something precious, something fragile, protecting it from the harshness of the outside world. He places the wrapped bundle deep inside the inner pockets of his coat, resting it close to the slow, steady beating of his own heart. He takes one last deep breath of the ancient cave air. A long, slow inhalation, filling his lungs with the scent of dry earth, old stone, and melting yuck butter, and a long, slow exhalation, releasing his breath back into the cavern. He pinches the wick of the butter lamp. The tiny flame sputters and dies, returning the alcove to its natural state of absolute, profound darkness. A thin wisp of sweet-smelling smoke rises from the extinguished wick, twisting slowly into the unseen heights of the cave ceiling. The monk pushes himself up from the floor. His knees crack softly in the quiet. He turns, his heavy robes sweeping the dust, and begins the slow walk back toward the entrance of the cave. As he approaches the mouth, the dark blue light of the winter evening begins to seep back into his vision. The acoustics shift once more. The heavy, deadened silence of the deep cavern gives way to the low, mournful howling of the wind sweeping across the Ganges basin. He steps over the threshold, leaving the sanctuary of the stone behind. The freezing air bites at his face, a sharp contrast to the still chill of the cave. He pulls his robes tighter around himself, feeling the heavy, solid weight of the ancient jawbone resting against his chest. Before him stretches the vast, empty expanse of the Tibetan Plateau, disappearing into the falling snow. It is a harsh world, an unforgiving landscape that has tested the endurance of life since the dawn of time. But as he begins the long, slow walk back toward his monastery, he feels a strange sense of comfort. He is carrying a piece of the deep past with him. He is carrying proof that humanity has always endured the cold, always sought the shelter of the mountain, and always found a way to survive the long, dark winter. He bows his head against the wind, his leather boots pressing softly into the fresh powder, each step taking him further away from the ancient world and deeper into the quiet, fading light of the present. The wind, the stone, and the silence. As the monk steps fully out from the dark mouth of the Baishiya Karst Cave, the biting cold of the winter evening wraps around him like a heavy cloak. The transition from the absolute, deadened stillness of the deep cavern to the sweeping, open air of the Tibetan Plateau is a physical weight. The wind here does not roar, it hums. It is a low, continuous vibration that moves across the frozen earth, carrying with it the scent of crushed ice and distant snowfall. He pauses at the threshold of the cave, standing where the pale dust meets the fresh snow. He reaches a hand into the thick folds of his maroon robes, pressing his palm against his chest. Beneath the layers of heavy wool, he can feel the solid, undeniable weight of the ancient jawbone he just pulled from the earth. Wrapped securely in a scrap of cloth, the petrified bone feels dense and heavy, an anchor of deep time resting close to his slowly beating heart. He takes a long, deliberate breath. The air at this altitude is thin and sharp and brilliantly cold. It fills his lungs with a clean, freezing purity. He holds it for a moment, letting the stillness of the mountain settle into his bones, and then slowly and effortlessly lets the breath go, watching it plume into a soft, white mist that drifts away on the breeze. Before him lies the Baishiya Basin. It is a place of such immense, sweeping scale that the human mind naturally quietens in its presence. As the twilight deepens, the landscape is painted in rich, heavy tones of indigo and slate and bruised purple. The basin is a vast, high-altitude depression, a massive bowl carved into the roof of the world. It is surrounded on all sides by rolling mountains that seem to sleep beneath their heavy blankets of snow. But the most striking feature of this isolated world is the wall of rock at his back. The sheer limestone cliffs of the Baishiya rock formation rise vertically from the grassy plains, stretching for miles like an impenetrable, pale fortress. In the fading light, the rock face takes on the colour of old parchment and ash. These cliffs have stood here for millions of years, slowly shaped by the relentless patience of water and wind and ice. They are a monument to deep geological time. Standing at their base, a human being is nothing more than a fleeting shadow. But there is no fear in this realization. There is only a profound, comforting humility. The mountain was here long before human memory, and it will remain here long after. It is a quiet guardian, watching over the sleeping earth. The monk begins his descent. The path leading away from the cave is narrow and steep, winding its way down the scree slope toward the floor of the basin. He moves with the careful, measured grace of a man who has spent his entire life walking on the edge of the sky. He places his leather boots down softly, testing the snow before shifting his weight. Beneath the fresh powder lies a layer of loose, broken limestone, buried and frozen together. With every step there is a soft, muffled crunch, a rhythmic sound that becomes a meditation of its own. Crunch, pause, crunch, pause. The cadence of his walking matches the slow rhythm of his breathing. As he reaches the gentler slope of the basin floor, the terrain shifts. The loose rock gives way to the vast, sweeping grasslands that define the Tibetan steppes. In the summer, this basin is a vibrant, living sea of rich green, teeming with life and movement. But now, in the heart of winter, the earth is asleep. The grass is completely buried under a thick, unbroken layer of snow. Only the tallest stalks of the hardy alpine steeper grass manage to break through the white surface. These resilient plants are frozen solid, encased in delicate sheaths of crystalline frost. As the monk walks through them, his heavy wool robes brush against the stiff, frozen stems. They produce a sound like the rustling of dry paper, a soft, papery whispering that trails behind him in the quiet evening air. If you were to kneel down and look closely At one of these frozen stalks, you would see the perfect, geometric patterns of the ice crystals clinging to the pale yellow grass. You would see how the plant has drawn all of its energy deep down into its roots, hiding beneath the frozen soil, waiting patiently for the warmth of a spring that is still months away. The earth is not dead, it is merely resting. It is drawing a long, deep breath of its own, settling into a deep and restorative slumber. The journey across the basin is long, and the light is fading rapidly. The deep blue of the sky is beginning to darken into a profound, velvety black. The first stars are beginning to pierce the atmosphere, shining with a cold, brilliant clarity that is only possible at this extreme altitude where the air is stripped of all moisture and haze. The Milky Way begins to reveal itself, a faint, ghostly river of light arching over the sleeping mountains. The monk does not use a lantern. He does not need one. The snow reflects the ambient light of the stars, turning the basin floor into a pale, softly glowing ocean. He navigates by memory, by the shape of the distant peaks, and by the subtle, curving contours of the land. His mind is quiet. He is not thinking about the past or the future. He is simply existing in the movement. He is feeling the cold air on his cheeks, the heavy warmth of the wool around his shoulders, and the solid, comforting weight of the ancient jawbone resting against his chest. Far off in the distance, a dark shape moves slowly against the white canvas of the snow. As the monk walks, his eyes adjust to the subtle differences in the shadows. It is a herd of yaks. They are massive, heavily built creatures, perfectly adapted to this brutal, beautiful world. They move with an incredibly slow, deliberate pacing, completely unbothered by the freezing temperature. Their thick, shaggy coats of black and dark brown hair hang almost to the ground, trapping the heat of their bodies and forming an impenetrable barrier against the wind. They are gathered tightly together, standing in a loose circle, their heads lowered as they use their heavy, curved horns to push away the top layer of snow, searching for the dry grass buried beneath. The sound of their breathing carries across the quiet, basin deep and resonant and slow. Even from this distance, the monk can hear the faint, comforting snorts and the gentle clacking of their horns. They are a symbol of endurance, a reminder that life finds a way to thrive even in the most isolated, silent corners of the world. Somewhere near the herd, hidden in the folds of the rolling hills, there is a nomad's camp. The monk cannot see the low, black woven tents made of yak hair, but he can smell them. Carried on the slow, drifting wind is the unmistakable scent of a hearth fire. It is a rich and earthy, slightly sweet smell of burning dried yak dung and juniper branches. It is the smell of human habitation, of warmth, of survival. The scent of the smoke is incredibly comforting. It speaks of a small, warm space carved out of the freezing night. It paints a picture in the mind of a family huddled around a glowing stove, drinking thick, salted butter tea, the steam rising into the cold air of the tent. The fire is small, but it is enough. It is enough to push back the dark. The monk draws the scent of the juniper smoke deep into his lungs, letting it mix with the sharp, clean cold of the high-altitude air. The combination is grounding. It anchors him to the present moment, to the quiet, enduring rhythm of life on the plateau. He continues to walk. The miles fall away slowly beneath his boots. The physical exertion of walking at over 10,000 feet above sea level requires a complete surrender to the environment. If you try to force your pace, the mountain will stop you. The thin air demands respect, and so the monk walks at the speed of a resting heartbeat. Hours pass. The night deepens into a state of absolute, profound tranquility. The only sounds in the entire world are the soft crushing of snow beneath leather, the rhythmic rustle of heavy wool, and the deep, slow intake of breath. Eventually, the dark, towering shape of a mountain pass begins to rise before him. Tucked into the protective curve of this valley, sheltered from the worst of the sweeping winds, lies his destination. It is a monastery, a sprawling complex of stone walls, wooden courtyards, and softly glowing windows that seem to cling to the side of the mountain like a cluster of warm amber stars. This is not just any monastery. It is the residence of a deeply revered figure in Tibetan Buddhism, the 6th Gangthang Rinpoche, a man considered to be a living Buddha, a reincarnated teacher of profound wisdom. It is to him that the monk carries the heavy, fossilized bone. The monk does not fully understand the scientific importance of what he has found, but his intuition, honed by years of silent meditation, tells him that this object belongs in the hands of someone who understands the deep, unwritten history of the earth. As he approaches the outer walls of the monastery complex, the environment begins to change once more. The wild, untamed silence of the open basin is gradually replaced by the soft, structured quiet of a spiritual sanctuary. The wind here is broken by the high stone walls, reduced to a gentle, whispering breeze that rustles through the eaves of the temple roofs. He walks up the wide, gently sloping stone steps leading to the main courtyard. The snow on the steps has been swept away, leaving the dark, rough-hewn stone exposed. His boots no longer crunch, they tap softly against the solid rock. The walls on either side of him are painted a deep, earthy red, the colour of dried clay, absorbing the faint starlight and radiating a sense of ancient permanence. Along the perimeter of the courtyard, mounted on wooden spindles, are hundreds of copper prayer wheels. As the monk passes them, he reaches out a heavy, wool-covered arm and gently brushes his fingers against the cool metal. The wheels begin to spin. They turn with a soft and rhythmic, metallic clicking sound, a gentle clack, clack, clack that echoes softly in the enclosed space. With every revolution of the cylinders, thousands of written prayers resting inside are released into the wind, carrying blessings out into the sleeping world. The sound of the spinning wheels is deeply hypnotic. It is a continuous, looping rhythm that lulls the mind into a state of deep, restorative peace. The monk walks slowly along the wall, keeping the wheels in motion, a physical manifestation of his own continuous, unbroken journey. He approaches the heavy wooden doors of the inner residence. The wood is ancient, darkened by centuries of incense smoke and the oil of thousands of hands. The air here smells profoundly different from the open steppes. The sharp scent of crushed ice and distant juniper fires is replaced by the heavy and sweet, intoxicating aroma of burning sandalwood and cedar and melting butter. It is a thick, warm scent that seems to wrap around the shoulders and ease the tension from the muscles. The monk stops before the door. He takes one final, deep breath of the freezing outdoor air, feeling it fill his chest one last time. He reaches into his robes, his fingers brushing against the rough cloth that wraps the ancient jawbone. It is still freezing to the touch, carrying the deep, subterranean chill of the Baishiya Karst Cave. It has completed its journey across the frozen sea of the Ganges basin. It has been carried from the absolute darkness of the prehistoric earth across the starlit snow to the warm, incense-filled threshold of the modern world. Gently, he raises his hand and knocks softly on the heavy wooden door. The sound is low and muted, a quiet request to enter the sanctuary. As he stands there in the stillness of the night, waiting for the door to open, the spinning copper prayer wheels behind him slowly begin to lose their momentum. Their rhythmic clicking grows softer and slower until they finally glide to a gentle, perfectly silent halt. The world is at rest. The long walk is over. The heavy stone is ready to be passed from the hands of the mountain into the hands of the living Buddha. The heavy wooden door does not open with a sudden noise. There is no sharp creak of iron hinges or the rushing sound of a sudden draught. Instead, it swings inward with a smooth, practiced silence, moving heavily across the threshold. The transition from the freezing, starlit courtyard to the interior of the monastery is an immediate immersion into warmth. The monk steps inside, his leather boots leaving the cold stone and pressing onto thick, woven rugs that line the floor. The air in the hallway is thick, almost entirely still, and rich with the accumulated scent of decades of devotion. It is a complex, grounding aroma, the sweet, sharp smoke of burning juniper branches mingling with the soft, earthy fragrance of cedar wood and the heavy, buttery scent of hundreds of small lamps burning in the adjoining rooms. It is a smell that instantly lowers the shoulders and commands the lungs to draw deeper, slower breaths. He is greeted by a younger attendant, dressed in the same maroon robes, who bows his head in silent acknowledgement. No words are necessary. The monastery operates on a rhythm of quiet intention. The attendant gestures down the long, dimly lit corridor, and the monk begins to walk. The sound of his footsteps is entirely absorbed by the thick rugs. The only noise in the corridor is the faint, rhythmic swish of heavy wool brushing against itself as he moves. The walls are lined with ancient Thankas intricate, hand-painted scrolls depicting the lives of deities and the endless cycles of the universe. In the low, flickering light of the butter lamps spaced along the walls, the golden paint on the scrolls seems to catch the warmth, glowing softly in the shadows. At the end of the corridor is a set of smaller, more intimately carved doors. This is the private residence of the 6th Gangthang Rinpoche, the living Buddha. The monk pauses before the doors, taking a slow, steadying breath. He reaches into the deep folds of his coat, his cold fingers tracing the rough texture of the wool scrap that holds the jawbone. Even in the profound warmth of the monastery, the stone feels ancient and chillingly cold, as if it is still holding on to the temperature of the Pleistocene earth. The doors part. The inner chamber is small and intimate and profoundly peaceful. The walls are lined with wooden bookshelves, bowed slightly under the weight of hundreds of rectangular, cloth-wrapped Tibetan texts. In the center of the room, seated on a raised cushion, is the Rinpoche. He is an older man, his face lined with the deep wisdom of a life spent in contemplation. He wears the traditional yellow and maroon robes of his station, draped comfortably over his shoulders. Before him is a low wooden table, smooth and polished by years of use, holding a single, glowing butter lamp and a cup of steaming tea. The monk approaches slowly, bowing deeply in reverence. He does not speak. He simply kneels before the low table, settling his weight onto the rug. He reaches into his coat and carefully withdraws the wrapped bundle. He places it gently on the polished wood. The dull thud of the heavy fossil sounding strangely loud in the quiet room. The Rinpoche does not ask what it is. He possesses the deep patience of a man who understands that all things will reveal themselves in time. He reaches out with hands that are weathered but incredibly steady. He slowly unwraps the rough wool cloth, peeling it back layer by layer until the heavy, mineral-encrusted jawbone rests under the warm, amber light of the lamp. For a long time, the only sound in the room is the faint, rhythmic crackle of the burning wick and the slow, synchronized breathing of the two men. The Rinpoche leans forward, his eyes studying the massive curve of the bone and the two enormous, flat teeth deeply rooted in the stone. He reaches out and touches the surface. He feels the heavy, unyielding density of it. He feels the thick carbonate crust that speaks of millennia spent buried in the damp earth. He traces the smooth edge where the jaw hinges, an anatomy that is undeniably human, yet entirely alien in its immense, robust proportions. He knows immediately that this is not the bone of a modern man. It is too heavy, it is too thick. He recognizes it not through the lens of modern paleontology, but through the deep, cultural understanding of the land. In the mythology of the plateau, there are stories of ancient beings, giants who walked the earth before the current age of humanity. The Rinpoche looks at the jawbone, then looks up at the monk. "Where did the mountain give you this?" he asks, his voice barely above a whisper, rough and soothing like dry leaves shifting over stone. The Baishiya Karst, the monk replies softly, "In the dust." The Rinpoche nods slowly. He understands the significance of the location. The Baishiya Cave is a sacred nexus, a place of deep spiritual power. For the earth to yield such a heavy, ancient relic from that specific place is not a coincidence. It is an offering. It is a piece of the earth's memory brought up from the dark into the light. But the Rinpoche also possesses a quiet, pragmatic wisdom. He looks at the bone, heavily fossilized and strange. He knows that the world outside the monastery walls is changing rapidly. It is 1980. The modern world is obsessed with categorizing and defining and claiming the past. If this bone were simply handed over to the authorities or displayed openly, its true nature might be misunderstood, or it might be lost entirely in the chaos of the changing times. He touches the heavy molars one last time, feeling the smooth, worn enamel that once ground the tough, fibrous meat of the ancient world. He knows that this bone is important. He knows that it holds a secret, but he also knows that it is not yet time for that secret to be told. The world is not ready to hear the story of the Baishiya Karst. Not yet. Slowly and deliberately, the Rinpoche rewraps the heavy jawbone in the rough wool cloth. He handles it with the same reverence he would give to a sacred text. He smooths the fabric, ensuring that the stone is completely covered, safe and protected. Behind his low wooden desk is a beautifully carved, heavy wooden cabinet. It is made of dark walnut, its surface polished to a deep, reflective sheen. It contains many small drawers, each one fitted with a simple brass handle. The Rinpoche turns to the cabinet. He reaches out and grasps the brass handle of one of the lower drawers. He pulls it open. The wood glides smoothly against wood, a soft, hushed sound of friction. The drawer is empty, lined with a piece of faded yellow silk. He lifts the wrapped bundle from the desk and places it gently into the drawer. It settles onto the silk with a soft, heavy finality. He looks at the drawer for a moment, a quiet understanding passing between him and the ancient relic. He is offering it sanctuary. He is giving it a safe place to rest, away from the freezing dust of the cave, and away from the loud, demanding rush of the modern world. It will be safe here. It will wait. He pushes the drawer shut. The wood slides back into place with a soft, satisfying click. The seal is tight. The drawer is closed. Inside that small, dark space, the jawbone returns to the silence it has known for 160,000 years. It is no longer buried beneath the earth, but it is buried in time. The thick wool cloth insulates it. The dark walnut wood protects it. It rests on the faded silk, utterly motionless, perfectly preserved. And so begins the long, silent wait. Time moves differently inside the drawer of the living Buddha. While the world outside the monastery walls races forward, the heavy stone jawbone remains completely still. It enters a state of suspended animation, a profound and peaceful sleep. Outside the monastery, the seasons turn with slow, inevitable majesty. The brutal, freezing winters of the Ganges basin give way to the brief, vibrant explosions of summer. The snow melts, running in freezing, crystalline streams down the limestone cliffs of the Baishiya Formation. The sweeping grasslands turn a brilliant, living green. The nomadic herds of yaks move across the valleys, their heavy hooves pressing softly into the damp earth. And then the air sharpens, the frost returns, and the world is blanketed once more in white. Inside the drawer there is no snow, there is no wind. There is only the faint, muffled sound of the monastery life drifting through the heavy wood. If you were to listen closely to the wood of that cabinet, you would hear the rhythm of the passing years. You would hear the soft, rhythmic chanting of the monks during their morning prayers, a low, resonant vibration that seeps into the floorboards and hums gently against the brass handles. You would hear the faint, high-pitched ringing of small ceremonial bells, a delicate sound that echoes softly down the carpeted corridors. You would hear the slow, measured sweeping of brooms across the courtyard stones, the sound of dust and time being gently brushed away. These sounds become the new atmosphere for the sleeping bone. They are slow and repetitive and deeply calming. They are the sounds of a world that values patience above all else. A decade passes. The 1980s fade into the 1990s. Outside, the world is becoming louder and faster, more connected. The roads leading to Shire County are paved. New faces appear in the monastery, bringing with them the restless energy of the modern age. But the drawer remains closed. The Rinpoche grows older. His movements become slower, more deliberate. Yet he never forgets what is resting in the lower drawer of his cabinet. Occasionally, in the quietest hours of the night, when the rest of the monastery is asleep and the only light comes from the dying embers of his butter lamp, he will look at the brass handle. He knows the heavy stone is still there, patiently waiting. He understands that he is merely a temporary guardian. His role is not to decipher the past, but to protect it until the right person arrives. Another decade passes. The heavy, mineralized jawbone does not age. It does not decay. The thick carbonate crust clinging to its immense teeth remains as hard as the day it was formed beneath the dripping water of the Baishiya Cave. The bone is a physical anchor to the Pleistocene, a solid piece of deep time resting silently in a drawer lined with faded yellow silk. It is waiting for a very specific intersection of time and knowledge. It is waiting for the moment when human science will possess the tools necessary to read the invisible language locked inside its structure. It is waiting for the invention of technologies that can pull ghosts from the dust to sequence DNA from the heavy, petrified dentin of its molars. But the bone does not know this. It only knows the quiet, warm darkness. It only knows the soft vibrations of the chanting monks and the scent of sandalwood incense that slowly permeates the walnut wood. Eventually, the time of the 6th Gangthang Rinpoche comes to an end. The monastery mourns the passing of their beloved teacher. The air is filled with the deep, resonant sound of the Redong Long, brass Tibetan horns that blow mournful, reverberating notes across the valley. The sound is heavy and ancient, echoing off the limestone cliffs and drifting out over the snowy grasslands. During the careful, respectful transition of his belongings, the lower drawer of the cabinet is finally opened. The soft, hushed friction of the wood gliding against wood is the same sound it made decades ago. The light of the modern world, slightly brighter, slightly colder, spills into the small space. Resting on the silk, still securely wrapped in the rough, dark maroon wool, is the heavy bundle. It is lifted from the drawer. The cloth is unwrapped. The ancient jawbone is exposed to the light once more. It has not changed. It is still massive, incredibly dense, and beautifully strange. But the world into which it is now emerging has changed profoundly. The people who look upon it now do not just see a relic of the mountain or a mythological giant. They see a puzzle. They see an anatomical impossibility. The jawbone is recognized as something of immense scientific value. The decision is made to pass it from the spiritual realm into the realm of academia. It will begin a new journey, leaving the high-altitude quiet of the monastery and travelling down toward the sprawling, bustling city of Lanzhou. It will be placed into a padded box, insulated against the vibrations of the road. It will leave the scent of juniper smoke and melting butter behind, but as the heavy wooden doors of the monastery close behind it, the jawbone carries the silence of the plateau with it. It has survived 160,000 years buried in freezing dust, and it has survived decades resting in the dark, warm drawer of a living Buddha. It is profoundly patient. It knows how to wait, and as it travels toward the bright, sterile lights of the university laboratories, it holds its secrets tightly within its heavy, petrified core, waiting for the right hands to slowly, meticulously brush the final layers of dust away. The journey from the high, silent altitude of the Ganjia basin down to the bustling, river-carved city of Lanzhou is a descent through time and atmosphere. As the padded box carrying the ancient jawbone travels lower, the air grows thicker, heavier with moisture and the hum of millions of lives. The profound, bruising cold of the Tibetan Plateau softens into the milder, dusty chill of the lowest valleys. The box arrives at Lanzhou University, an institution deeply embedded in the study of the Earth's ancient past. It is carried through corridors that do not smell of juniper smoke or melting butter, but of old paper, polished linoleum, and the faint, metallic tang of sterile equipment. The lighting here is not the warm, flickering amber of a single flame. It is the steady and cool, unbroken white of fluorescent tubes. Yet, within the archaeology department, there exists a different kind of quiet reverence. It is a silence born not of spiritual meditation, but of intense, focused observation. It is the quiet of a library after hours, the stillness of a mind, trying to listen to the whispers of a world long dead. The box is brought into a laboratory. The room is immaculate. The surfaces are smooth, dark slate, designed to contrast with the pale colours of bone and stone. The air temperature is carefully controlled, a steady, comfortable coolness that preserves the delicate integrity of ancient finds. Standing beside one of these slate tables is Dr. Dongju Zhong. She is an archaeologist whose life's work is tied to the harsh, unforgiving landscapes of the Tibetan Plateau. She understands the brutal beauty of the high altitude, and she knows how sparingly the earth gives up its secrets in such a freezing, dry environment. She is a woman of immense patience, accustomed to spending months on her hands and knees, brushing away milligrams of dirt to find a single, shattered flake of flint. The padded box is set down on the table before her. She does not rush. In her profession, rushing is the enemy of truth. She gently undoes the clasps of the box. The lid hinges open with a soft, perfectly oiled sigh. Inside, resting on a bed of dark, archival quality foam, is the relic. It is no longer wrapped in the rough, maroon wool of the monk. It sits exposed under the bright, even light of the laboratory lamps. Dr. Zhang reaches out. Her hands are bare, her skin clean and dry. She places her fingers gently on the sides of the bone and lifts it from the foam. The first thing that strikes her, just as it struck the monk in the freezing dust of the Baishiya Cave decades earlier, is the sheer, undeniable weight of it. It is incredibly heavy. It feels less like biological material and more like a piece of iron ore. The slow, creeping process of fossilization has replaced every microscopic cell of living tissue with solid, heavy minerals from the cave water. She turns the jawbone slowly under the light, her eyes tracking every curve, every groove, every shadow. The silence in the laboratory deepens. The faint hum of the ventilation system seems to fade into the background as her mind locks entirely onto the object in her hands. To an untrained eye, it is just a strange, lumpy piece of rock with teeth. But to an archaeologist, bone is a landscape. Every ridge is a mountain range, every depression is a valley. Bone is shaped by the life of the creature that wore it. The pull of muscles, the strain of chewing, the stress of the environment, all of these forces leave permanent, readable topographies on the skeleton. Dr. Zhang looks at the topography of this jawbone, and she is immediately confronted with an anatomical impossibility. She traces the curve of the mandible, the lower jaw. In a modern human, even the most powerfully built, the jaw is relatively graceful. It has a distinct chin, a delicate sweep of bone that anchors the face. This bone has no chin. It slopes sharply backward, a robust, primitive architecture designed to support massive, incredibly powerful facial muscles. The thickness of the bone itself is staggering. It is as thick as a human wrist. Her fingers move to the teeth. There are 2 molars still deeply rooted in the heavy stone. They are immense. They are flat and wide and heavily worn down, smoothed by a lifetime of grinding tough, fibrous foods roots, raw meat, gritty plants pulled from the freezing earth. Clinging to the sides of the teeth and filling the deep crevices between them is a thick, pale crust. It is a carbonate crust. Dr. Zhang knows exactly what this is. When water drips slowly through the limestone roof of a cave, it carries dissolved minerals with it. If that water drips onto a bone resting in the dirt, the minerals slowly build up, drop by drop, century by century, encasing the bone in a hard, white shell. It is the same process that creates stalagmites. The presence of this crust is a profound clue. It means this bone did not just die in the dirt. It lay undisturbed on the floor of a limestone cave for an unimaginable span of time, while the water of the earth slowly entombed it. She sets the heavy jawbone down on the soft, grey felt of an examination mat. She pulls a large, illuminated magnifying glass on a swivel arm over the table. She switches it on. A ring of brilliant, shadowless light floods the surface of the bone. She leans in, her breath shallow and quiet. Through the thick glass of the lens, the surface of the fossil becomes a vast alien terrain. She can see the microscopic pitting of the bone, the tiny networks where blood vessels once pulsed with warm life. She can see the exact texture of the carbonate crust, rough and crystalline, clinging stubbornly to the smooth enamel of the massive teeth. She knows, with absolute certainty, what this is not. This is not a modern human. This is not Homo sapiens. We do not possess this heavy, brutal architecture. We have never possessed it. This jawbone belongs to a different branch of the human family tree. It belongs to a ghost. But which ghost? The geography of the discovery makes no sense. The Ganges Basin is over 10,000 feet above sea level. It is one of the most extreme, hypoxic environments on the planet. For decades, the accepted scientific consensus has been that only modern humans, with our advanced tools, tailored clothing, and complex social structures, were capable of surviving in such a punishing, high-altitude world. The idea that an archaic, primitive hominin could survive the freezing, oxygen-starved winters of the Tibetan Plateau before the last ice age is considered impossible. Yet, the impossible is resting on the grey felt of her examination table. Dr. Zhang straightens up. She turns off the magnifying light. The laboratory returns to its steady, cool illumination. She looks at the jawbone, feeling a profound sense of awe settling over her. She is standing at the edge of a vast, dark canyon of history, and this piece of stone is the only bridge across. To understand who this being was, she needs to look closer than the shape of the bone. She needs to look inside it. She needs to strip away the stone and find the microscopic echoes of life that might still be trapped within. The process of archaeological science is slow. It is methodical. It requires a patience that rivals the monks of the plateau. Over the next several weeks, the jawbone becomes the center of a quiet, intensely focused world. Dr. Zhang and her team work with the delicate precision of watchmakers. First, they must address the heavy carbonate crust. They cannot simply chip it away. The risk of damaging the priceless teeth beneath is too great. Instead, they use tiny, vibrating tools no larger than a dentist's drill. The work is done under heavy magnification. It is a slow, rhythmic meditation. The tool hums softly, vibrating against the stone. A tiny puff of white dust rises into the air. The scientist pauses, uses a soft brush finer than a makeup brush to gently sweep the dust away. They look through the lens, assess the progress, and begin again. Hum, puff of dust, sweep. This process takes days. Slowly, millimeter by millimeter, the thick white crust is removed, revealing the dark and smooth, beautifully preserved enamel of the massive molars beneath. As they clean the bone, they are also searching for something else. They are looking for a way to date it. They cannot use traditional radiocarbon dating. Carbon dating only works on organic material things that were once alive and still contain carbon, and it only reaches back about 50,000 years. This jawbone is entirely petrified. All its organic carbon has been replaced by stone, and Dr. Zhang suspects it is far older than 50 millennia. Instead, they must rely on the very crust they are so carefully removing. Using a technique called uranium series dating, they analyze the tiny amounts of radioactive isotopes trapped within the carbonate crust. As the water dripped onto the bone in the dark cave, it carried trace amounts of uranium. Over time, that uranium decays into thorium at a known, predictable rate. It is a slow, invisible geological clock, ticking away in the dark for thousands of years. The scientists take microscopic samples of the crust. They dissolve them in powerful acids, purifying the elements, and feed them into massive, humming mass spectrometers. The machines are loud, complex beasts of modern science, but the work they do is incredibly delicate, counting individual atoms to read the time. The results, when they finally arrive, are staggering. The crust covering the jawbone is at least 160,000 years old. This means the bone itself must be even older. It means that 160 millennia ago, during the Middle Pleistocene, an era of massive glaciers and brutal climate shifts, a human ancestor was living and breathing and surviving at 3,200 meters above sea level. The realization settles over the laboratory like a heavy, quiet snow. 160,000 years. It is a number so vast that the human mind struggles to hold it. Imagine the drawer of the living Buddha, where the bones sat for 30 years. Multiply that by 5,000. Think of the monk walking through the snow in 1980. Think of the rise and fall of every empire in human history. Think of the building of the pyramids, the invention of agriculture, the end of the last ice age. All of it is merely a thin layer of dust on the surface of time compared to the age of this heavy, silent stone. But age is only half the mystery. The question remains, who were they? The shape of the jaw points away from Homo sapiens. It points away from Neanderthals, whose jaws, while robust, have a different, distinct geometry. To find the true identity of the ghost, Dr. Zhang's team must look deeper than the shape of the bone. They must look into the microscopic architecture of the teeth. They focus on the dentin, the hard, dense tissue that lies beneath the enamel of the molars. Even though the bone is heavily fossilized, there is a microscopic, fragile chance that deep within the core of the tooth, locked away from the destructive forces of water and oxygen, a few fragments of original biological material have survived. They are not looking for DNA. In a fossil this old, pulled from an environment that fluctuates in temperature, the long, delicate strands of DNA are almost certainly shattered into unreadable dust. Instead, they are looking for proteins. Proteins are tougher than DNA. They are the building blocks of the body, the structural scaffolding of life. And crucially, the sequence of amino acids in a protein is dictated directly by the genetic code. If you can read the protein, you can read a shadow of the DNA. It is like finding the impression of a lost letter pressed into a pad of paper long after the ink has faded. The process is incredibly delicate. It requires a profound, quiet concentration. They extract a microscopic sample of the ancient dentin, no larger than a grain of salt. They dissolve it, using specialized enzymes to break down the fossilized matrix and release whatever ancient proteins might be trapped inside. The liquid is then fed into a mass spectrometer, a machine that reads the exact mass and charge of the molecules, translating the physical chemistry into a digital sequence. The laboratory is completely silent as the machine works. The hum of the spectrometer is the only sound, a low, steady vibration that fills the room. Dr. Zhang watches the computer monitor, waiting for the digital readout. The data slowly begins to cascade down the screen. A sequence of amino acids, a string of letters that has not existed in a living being for 160,000 years. It is a slow, methodical translation. The scientists take this ancient sequence and compare it to the massive digital libraries of every known hominin species. They hold the ghost up to the light of modern science and ask it to identify itself. The sequence does not match modern humans. It does not match Neanderthals. It matches only one thing in the entire database. It matches a sequence pulled from a tiny, shattered fragment of a pinky bone found thousands of miles away. In a freezing cave in the Altai Mountains of Siberia, the sequence belongs to a Denisovan. The silence in the room takes on a new, profound weight. The Denisovans, they are the great phantoms of human evolution. Before this moment, they were known almost entirely from a few tiny scraps of bone and teeth found in that single Siberian cave. They were a shadow lineage, a sister group to the Neanderthals, who wandered the vast expanses of Asia while our own ancestors were still confined to Africa. No one knew what they looked like. No one knew how far they had spread. They were a whisper in the genetic code, a ghost story written in shattered DNA. And now and here, on a grey felt mat in a brightly lit laboratory in Lanzhou, rests the largest, most complete physical manifestation of a Denisovan ever discovered. Dr. Zhang looks at the massive, heavy jawbone. The lights of the laboratory seem to reflect off the smooth enamel of the ancient teeth with a newfound clarity. They were here. The phantoms were real. 160,000 years ago, long before the first modern human ever looked up at the towering peaks of the Himalayas, the Denisovans had already conquered the roof of the world. They were living and breathing, and thriving in the freezing, oxygen-starved heights of the Baishiya Karst Cave. The realization is not a loud, triumphant shout. It is a slow, deeply humbling exhale. It is the feeling of looking up at the night sky and realizing that the universe is infinitely larger and older and more complex than you ever imagined. The heavy stone jawbone, which has journeyed from the dark dust of the cave to the warm, incense-scented drawer of the monk, to the sterile, bright lights of the laboratory, has finally spoken. It has told its secret. But the story is not over. The jawbone is only a single piece of the puzzle. To truly understand who these people were, we cannot just look at their bones. We must look at their world. We must close our eyes to the bright fluorescent lights of the modern laboratory, and we must travel back through the vast, unbroken river of time. We must return to the Baishiya Karst Cave, not in the winter of 1980, but in the deep, freezing heart of the Pleistocene. We must go back 160,000 years and watch the shadows of the phantoms dancing on the ancient stone walls. To watch the shadows of phantoms dancing on ancient stone walls, we must first understand who these phantoms were. For years, the Denisovans existed only as a whisper in the dark, a biological ghost story whispered among geneticists and archaeologists. Before the heavy, petrified jawbone was pulled from the dust of the Baishiya Karst Cave, Our entire knowledge of this lost branch of humanity was confined to a tiny, almost microscopic collection of fragments found thousands of miles away. In the freezing expanse of the Altai Mountains in Siberia, inside a cavern known as Denisova Cave, scientists had sifted through tons of earth to find a single, shattered piece of a child's pinky bone and a few unusually large teeth. That was all the earth had offered. There were no skulls, no complete skeletons, no grand monuments left behind. There was only enough bone to extract a sequence of DNA. But that sequence was enough to prove that they were there. They were our cousins, a parallel lineage of humanity that had walked out of Africa hundreds of thousands of years before we did, wandering eastward into the vast, untamed wilderness of Asia. Because we had no bones to look at, the Denisovans had no face. They were a shapeless entity in the human family tree. We did not know how tall they were, how strong they were, or how far their quiet empire stretched. They simply existed as a shadow, a quiet presence moving through the deep past, leaving nothing but invisible genetic echoes in the dirt. But the discovery of the Siohi mandible the heavy, robust jawbone resting on the grey felt of the Lanzhou laboratory changed the shape of the shadow. It gave the ghost a physical weight. It proved that the Denisovans were not just surviving in the sheltered valleys of Siberia, they were climbing. They had pushed their way up to the very roof of the world. To realize that these archaic humans had conquered the Tibetan Plateau 160,000 years ago is to witness the rewriting of what it means to be a survivor. The air at 3,200 meters is punishingly thin. The winters are long and dark and deeply freezing. For decades, the modern human ego assumed that only we, Homo sapiens, with our advanced intellect, our complex languages, and our finely tailored clothing, could possibly endure such an extreme, hypoxic environment. We believed we were the first to look out over the sweeping expanse of the Ganges Basin. We were wrong. Long before the first modern human ever set foot on the high-altitude grasses, the Denisovans were already there. They were breathing the thin air. They were watching the snow fall over the limestone cliffs. They were listening to the exact same howling wind that the monk would listen to millennia later. To truly understand them, we must lay down the tools of modern science. We must step away from the humming mass spectrometers, the glowing computer screens, and the bright, sterile lights of the laboratory. We must allow the mind to unspool, to untangle itself from the rigid, fast-paced demands of the present day, and surrender to the slow and heavy, mesmerizing pull of deep time, 160,000 years. It is a span of time so vast, so unfathomably deep, that it cannot be measured in human lifespans, or even in the rise and fall of civilizations. If you try to hold that number in your mind, it begins to blur, slipping through your thoughts like dry, powdery dust. To measure 160 millennia, you cannot use the ticking of a clock. You must use the breathing of the earth itself. The earth breathes in slow, massive cycles. An inhalation of deep, planetary cold brings the ice ages, where massive glaciers slowly crawl across the continents, grinding stone into dust, locking the oceans away in towering walls of blue ice. This inhalation takes tens of thousands of years. And then the earth exhales, the climate gently warms, the ice retreats, melting into vast, sweeping rivers that carve new valleys into the rock. Forests rise from the damp soil, spreading their green canopies under the sun, only to be pushed back again when the earth takes its next freezing breath. This is the rhythm of the deep past. It is a slow cosmic pendulum swinging back and forth in absolute silence. Let your own breathing match this slow, ancient rhythm. Draw the air in deeply, feeling the cool stillness fill your lungs, holding it for a suspended moment of quiet peace, and then release it slowly, letting the weight of the modern world flow out of your muscles. With every breath, allow the present to fade a little more. Imagine the bright, steady fluorescent lights of the laboratory beginning to dim. They soften at the edges, losing their sharp, clinical clarity, melting into the soft, blurred tones of twilight. The low hum of the ventilation system fades away, replaced by the faint, distant sound of wind moving over open grass. We are travelling backward. The sprawling, concrete city of Lanzhou slowly begins to dismantle itself in the mind's eye. The towering buildings recede, sinking back into the earth, returning to sand and iron ore. The paved highways dissolve into dirt paths, and then the paths themselves are swallowed by the wild, untamed wilderness. The noise of millions of lives is hushed, replaced by the profound, unbroken quiet of the ancient world. We drift back up the mountains, ascending into the high, thin air of the Tibetan Plateau. We watch time unravel in reverse. We see the monasteries of the plateau unbuild themselves, their red walls turning back into clay, their copper prayer wheels unspinning, dissolving into the rock. We see the monk in the maroon robes walking backward through the snow, carrying the heavy jawbone out of the living Buddha's drawer, out of the monastery and back across the frozen basin. We see him kneel in the dark of the Baishiya Cave, and we watch as he gently places the fossilized bone back into the soft, grey earth. We watch the dust slowly cover it, burying it in darkness once more. And then we go deeper. We fall backward through the millennia, passing through ice ages and warming periods, watching the glaciers advance and retreat in a beautiful and silent time-lapse dance. We do not stop until we reach the middle Pleistocene, 160,000 years ago. The world we arrive in is profoundly still. The Ganges basin stretches out before us, but it is wilder and rougher, and more deeply isolated than anything in the modern age. The air here is incredibly crisp, utterly devoid of the microscopic pollutants and dust of human industry. It is the purest air the earth has ever known. When you draw it into your lungs, it feels like inhaling cold, liquid crystal. The sky above the basin is a deep, impossible shade of indigo, transitioning into a vibrant, bruising violet near the horizon, because the air is so thin and so remarkably clear. The stars do not just twinkle, they burn. They are scattered across the heavens in thick, glowing clusters, a massive, unmoving canopy of silver light that illuminates the snow-covered ground below. The geography is familiar, yet strangely altered. The towering limestone cliffs of the Baishiya Formation are there, pale and ghostly in the starlight, but the mountains surrounding the basin are crowned with massive, slow-moving glaciers. These rivers of ice glow with a faint, internal blue light. They are silent giants, imperceptibly shaping the stone beneath them, locking the world in a deep, enduring freeze. The winter of the Pleistocene is long, and the cold is absolute. It is a cold that commands respect, a temperature that stills the movement of water and freezes the sap deep within the roots of the alpine grass. There is no sound of distant traffic. There is no hum of electricity. There is only the low, continuous whispering of the wind as it sweeps down from the glacial peaks, carrying the scent of ancient ice and dry, frozen earth. We move slowly across the basin, gliding over the snow without leaving a footprint, silent observers in a forgotten time. We approach the base of the towering limestone cliff. The great, dark mouth of the Baishiya Karst Cave looms before us. But as we draw nearer, the atmosphere of the cavern is entirely different from the sanctuary the monk will visit in the distant future. There are no prayer flags strung across the entrance, snapping in the wind. There is no scent of sweet sandalwood incense or the delicate aroma of melting yak butter. This is not a temple. It has not yet been named sacred by the minds of modern men. It is something far more vital. It is a home. As we stand at the threshold, where the freezing wind meets the still, heavy air of the cave interior, we can smell it. It is the rich and heavy, unmistakable scent of a hearth fire. It is the smell of burning pine branches, dry alpine scrub, and the rich, dark smoke of animal fat dropping into hot embers. It is a scent that triggers a deep, primal feeling of safety in the human brain. It means warmth. It means survival. It means that the long, dark night has been pushed back. We step inside. The acoustics of the cave wrap around us, muting the howling wind outside. The air here is warmer, heated by the slow, steady burn of the fire deep within the main chamber. The floor is not covered in the soft, powdery dust of millennia. It is hard-packed earth, worn smooth by the daily tread of heavy, calloused feet. Down the dark tunnel, a light flickers. It is not the tiny, perfectly still, amber teardrop of a single butter lamp. It is the dancing and shifting, chaotic orange glow of a true wood fire. The light pulses against the rough limestone walls, casting long, twisting shadows that seem to breathe and move with the rhythm of the flames. We walk slowly toward the light, our presence completely unnoticed. As we enter the main chamber, the source of the warmth reveals itself. A fire is built in a shallow depression in the earth, surrounded by a ring of blackened river stones. The flames are low but incredibly hot, feeding on thick branches of tough, high-altitude wood. The smoke rises in a thick, grey column, catching the draft of the cavern and twisting its way up toward unseen cracks in the ceiling, drawn out into the freezing night sky. And gathered around this fire, resting in the warm, dancing light, are the Denisovans. There is no sudden movement. There is no loud chatter. The profound quiet of the mountain extends into their home. They are a small family group, perhaps 6 or 7 individuals, huddled comfortably together in the warmth. They do not look like monsters. They do not look like brutes. They look like survivors, perfectly adapted to the beautiful, terrible world they inhabit. Their bodies are massive, built with a heavy, thick-boned architecture designed to conserve heat and generate immense physical power. Their chests are broad and deep, housing massive lungs capable of pulling the vital oxygen from the thin, high-altitude air. Their skin is weathered, tanned by the harsh ultraviolet light of the plateau sun, and their faces possess the strong and sloping, chinless jawlines that modern science will one day marvel at. They are draped in thick, heavy hides, the furs of ancient wolves and the thick, woolly skins of mountain sheep are wrapped tightly around their shoulders, providing an impenetrable barrier against the cold. The firelight dances across their dark eyes, eyes that hold a deep, quiet intelligence. They are resting. The work of the day is done. One of them, A large male with a heavy brow and a calm, slow demeanor uses a thick wooden stick to gently push a stray ember back into the heart of the fire. The movement is practiced, casual. A shower of tiny orange sparks rises into the air, swirling beautifully for a brief moment before fading into the dark. Beside him, a female is working a piece of heavy hide. She holds a small, sharp piece of chipped flint in her hand. With slow and rhythmic, scraping motions, she runs the stone over the inside of the skin, softening the leather. Scrape, pause, scrape, pause. The sound is deeply hypnotic, a steady, domestic percussion that blends perfectly with the crackle and hiss of the burning wood. A child sleeps near the warmth of the stones, curled into a tight ball, buried almost entirely beneath a mountain of soft fur. The slow, steady rise and fall of the child's breathing is visible beneath the hides, completely at peace, completely safe while the Ice Age winter rages outside. This is the reality of the Denisovans. They are not a string of digital data on a computer screen. They are not just a heavy, petrified piece of bone resting on a laboratory table. They are a family, sitting together in the dark, watching the firelight dance on the walls, finding comfort in each other's presence. The silence of the cave is broken only by the crackle of the sap in the fire and the rhythmic scraping of the flint. It is a moment of profound prehistoric domesticity. There is no anxiety about the future. There is no regret about the past. There is only the warmth of the fire, the solid stone of the mountain at their backs, and the deep, continuous rhythm of their breathing in the thin mountain air. As you watch them sitting in the golden glow of the hearth, let your own breathing fall into sync with theirs. Draw the air in slowly, feeling the warmth of the imaginary fire on your skin. Hold it for a moment of quiet stillness, and then let it go, sinking deeper into the soft, heavy darkness of the deep past. The modern world is completely gone. You are safe here in the quiet sanctuary of the ancient earth, surrounded by the sleeping phantoms of the Baishiya Karst Cave, to watch the Denisovans resting around the hearth fire inside the Baishiya Karst Cave is to witness humanity stripped down to its most profound and resilient core. There is no performance here. There is no anxiety about tomorrow or regret for yesterday. There is only the immediate, heavy reality of the present moment, the heat of the flames against the skin, the satisfying weight of a full stomach, and the solid, impenetrable safety of the limestone walls holding back the Pleistocene winter. If you sit quietly in the shadows of the cave, allowing your eyes to fully adjust to the dancing, golden light of the fire, you begin to see the subtle, beautiful details of their existence. You see that they are not brutish, unthinking creatures. Every movement they make is precise, deeply intentional, and perfectly adapted to the brutal demands of the Tibetan Plateau. Notice the sheer physical density of their bodies. They are built with an architecture of survival that modern humans have entirely lost. Their bones are thick and incredibly heavy, anchoring powerful, rope-like muscles designed for bursts of immense strength. But despite this raw power, their movements around the fire are gentle. The large male with the heavy, sloping brow, the one who holds the jawbone that will one day turn to stone, reaches out a thick, calloused hand to adjust the sleeping furs of the child near the embers. His touch is astonishingly light. He tucks a heavy edge of wolf skin under the child's chin, ensuring no cold draft can reach the small, sleeping face. The fire pops, sending a slow shower of tiny orange sparks spiraling up into the high, dark ceiling of the cavern. The sparks illuminate the rough texture of the ceiling for just a fraction of a second before dying out. The female sitting across from the fire pauses her work. She sets down the piece of chipped flint she has been using to scrape the heavy hide. The sound of the flint grinding against the tough leather ceases, replaced entirely by the low, steady hum of the wind outside the cave mouth. She raises her head, looking toward the dark tunnel that leads to the entrance. She is listening. Her ears are attuned to frequencies that modern humans would never register. In the absolute silence of the Ice Age, a sudden shift in the wind, the distant cracking of a frozen branch, or the soft, muffled footfall of a snow leopard are all critical pieces of information. She listens for a long time, her face completely still, her dark eyes reflecting the firelight, but there is no danger. The wind holds only the sound of falling snow and the slow, grinding movement of the distant glaciers. The mountain is asleep. Satisfied, she picks up the flint and resumes her slow, rhythmic scraping. Scrape, pause, scrape, pause. The sound becomes a hypnotic metronome, a steady beat that anchors the small group in the quiet warmth of their home. This cave is their entire universe during the darkest, coldest months of the year. The Baishiya Karst is vast, a sprawling labyrinth of chambers that stretch deep into the bedrock, but they occupy only the front vestibule, close enough to the entrance to draw in fresh air for the fire, but deep enough to escape the biting chill of the plateau winds. The floor around the hearth is covered in layers of dry, golden grass harvested during the brief summer months and brought inside to create a soft, insulating barrier against the cold stone. Over this grass they have laid thick, heavy pelts. The furs are incredibly soft, cured with animal brains and wood smoke, until they are pliable and warm. This is their bedding. It smells strongly of earth, of old smoke, and of the wild, musky scent of the high-altitude animals they hunt. As the night deepens, the fire begins to burn down. The flames lower, turning from bright, dancing orange into a deep, glowing crimson. The core of the fire becomes a bed of intensely hot embers, radiating a steady, heavy warmth that bakes the surrounding stone. The large male shifts his weight on the furs. He uses a thick wooden branch to push the remaining unburned wood toward the center of the coals, ensuring the fire will smolder slowly until morning. He does not need to build it up into a roaring blaze. The design of the hearth, surrounded by heat-absorbing river stones, is incredibly efficient. One by one, the Denisovans begin to settle into sleep. There is no formal ritual. There is simply the quiet surrender to fatigue. The female sets aside the scraped hide, rolling it into a tight bundle to use as a pillow. She lies down on her side, pulling a massive, heavy sheepskin over her shoulders. She curls her knees slightly toward her chest, drawing her dense body heat inward. The others follow suit. They arrange themselves in a loose circle around the glowing embers, their bodies forming a barrier of warmth around the sleeping child in the center. The heavy furs are pulled up over their heads, leaving only small gaps for breathing. In the dim, crimson light of the dying fire, they look like a cluster of soft, dark boulders resting on the cave floor. The silence in the cavern is now absolute. The rhythmic scraping of the flint is gone. The popping of the sap in the fire has stopped. The only sound in the entire chamber is the slow, collective breathing of the family. It is a beautiful, resonant sound. because of their massive, deep chests. Their breathing is slow and incredibly powerful. It is not the shallow, rapid panting of a modern human struggling at high altitude. It is a steady, rhythmic draw of air. Inhale. A long, deep pull that fills the vast capacity of their lungs. Exhale. A slow, controlled release that pushes a thick plume of white mist from beneath the edge of the firs. The mist rises slowly, catching the faint red glow of the embers before dissipating into the dark air above. If you match your own breathing to this deep, prehistoric rhythm, you can feel your heart rate slowing dramatically. Inhale. 2, 3, 4. Feel the cool air filling the deepest parts of your chest. Exhale. 2, 3, 4. Feel the tension melting away, sinking down into the soft furs and the solid stone beneath them. The Denisovans sleep deeply. They are not plagued by the restless insomnia of the modern age. Their bodies are exhausted from the physical demands of survival, and their minds are uncluttered by the abstract anxieties that keep Homo sapiens awake in the dark. When a Denisovan closes their eyes, they slip immediately into a state of profound, restorative unconsciousness. Outside the cave, the Pleistocene winter continues its relentless assault. The wind howls across the Baishiya Basin, driving a blinding curtain of snow sideways across the frozen steppe grass. The temperature plummets far below zero, a deep, bruising cold that cracks the bark of the few stunted juniper trees, clinging to the cliff face. The glaciers high above groan and shift, the ancient ice moving with an agonizingly slow, tectonic force. But inside the Baishiya Karst Cave, none of this matters. The limestone walls are several feet thick. They are completely impervious to the wind. The temperature inside the main chamber remains steady, anchored by the radiant heat of the embers and the collective body heat of the sleeping family. It is a cocoon of safety, a small pocket of warmth carved out of an incredibly hostile world. Hours pass in total stillness. The night stretches on, a dark, unbroken expanse of time. The embers of the fire slowly shift from crimson to a dull, bruised purple. As they cool, they occasionally emit a tiny, soft crackle, a sound no louder than a dry leaf breaking underfoot. A thin wisp of sweet, smelling wood smoke continues to curl toward the ceiling, painting the rough stone with an invisible layer of soot that will remain there long after the Denisovans are gone. The heavy, fossilized jawbone that the monk will find 160,000 years later currently belongs to the large male sleeping nearest to the embers. Right now, it is not petrified stone. It is living, breathing bone, anchoring powerful jaw muscles that rise and fall slightly with every exhalation. It is completely unaware of the immense journey it will undertake through time. It simply rests against the soft fur of the sheepskin, warm and alive. As you watch them sleep, you begin to understand the true nature of their existence. The Denisovans were not merely surviving the Ice Age on the Tibetan Plateau, they had mastered it. They had found harmony with one of the most punishing environments on Earth. They knew how to read the wind, how to find the dry wood buried under the snow, and how to turn the skin of a mountain sheep into an impenetrable shield against the cold. They were the undisputed lords of the high altitude. They were the first humans to truly look out over the roof of the world and call it home. And as the long, dark night finally begins to loosen its grip on the Baishiya Basin, a subtle change occurs in the atmosphere of the cave. The absolute, heavy blackness of the entrance tunnel begins to soften. A faint slate grey light the colour of cold iron, begins to seep in from the outside world. It is the dawn. The transition from night to morning is agonizingly slow. There is no sudden burst of golden sunlight. The sky over the plateau simply lightens from black to dark blue, to grey, and finally to a pale, freezing white. The wind outside loses its sharp, howling edge, settling into a steady, low hum that sweeps the fresh, powdery snow in long, drifting veils across the basin floor. Inside the cave, the family begins to stir. The female is the first to wake. She does not jolt upright. Her awakening is a slow, gradual surfacing from the depths of sleep. She simply opens her dark eyes, staring quietly at the dull purple embers of the hearth for a long moment. She takes a deep, slow breath of the cold morning air, feeling the familiar chill bite at the tip of her nose. She throws back the heavy sheepskin pelt with a fluid, powerful motion. The cold air of the cave instantly hits her skin, but she does not shiver. Her dense, thick-boned body is built to withstand the shock of the temperature change. She pushes herself up, her joints cracking softly in the quiet. She reaches out and gently shakes the shoulder of the large male. He grunts softly, a low, resonant vibration deep in his chest. He rolls onto his back, stretching his massive arms above his head, pushing against the heavy furs. The muscles in his shoulders and chest ripple with raw, prehistoric power. The cave is coming back to life. The slow, deliberate routines of survival are about to begin again. The female reaches for a small pile of dry juniper twigs she had gathered the day before. She crumbles them in her thick hands, breaking them down into a rough, fragrant powder. She places the crumbled wood directly onto the hottest part of the purple embers. She leans down, bringing her face close to the stones. She takes a deep breath, filling her massive lungs, and blows softly, steadily onto the coals. The breath is a long, continuous stream of air. The embers instantly brighten, flashing from purple back to a brilliant, glowing orange. The dry juniper powder catches. A tiny thread of white smoke appears, smelling sharply of pine and resin. She blows again, slightly harder this time. The flame catches. The fire is reborn. The small, dancing yellow light instantly pushes back the grey gloom of the morning, returning the warm, golden glow to the limestone walls of the cavern. The large male sits up, wrapping a thick wolf pelt around his waist. He looks at the newly kindled fire, his eyes reflecting the dancing flames. He looks toward the entrance of the cave, where the pale white light of the dawn is spilling across the dusty floor. It is time. The storm has passed. The fresh snow has covered the tracks of the previous day, creating a pristine, white canvas across the Baishiya Basin. The air is still and freezing, and perfectly clear. He stands up. His head nearly brushes the low ceiling of the alcove. He reaches for a long, heavy wooden spear leaning against the stone wall. The tip of the spear has been hardened in the fire, blackened and sharpened to a lethal point. He does not need to speak. The female understands. The winter is long, and the family requires fuel. They need the rich, heavy fat and the dense protein that only the mountain can provide. He steps over the sleeping child, who remains buried deep beneath the firs, undisturbed by the morning activity. He walks slowly toward the tunnel, his bare, calloused feet making no sound on the hard, packed earth. He pauses at the threshold of the cave mouth, where the dark stone meets the brilliant, blinding white of the snow. He takes one final, deep breath of the wood smoke from the hearth, filling his lungs with the scent of home. And then He steps out into the freezing dawn. The hunt has begun. To step out of the Baishiya Karst Cave into the dawn of a Pleistocene winter is to enter a world of absolute, blinding clarity. The snow that fell during the night has smoothed the jagged edges of the Ganges basin, turning the sweeping grasslands into a vast, unbroken ocean of pale blue and brilliant white. The air is so cold that it feels heavy, almost viscous in the lungs. It is a temperature that immediately crystallizes the moisture on the edges of the Denisovans' thick fur garments, rhyming the dark wolf hair with a delicate, sparkling frost. The large male stands at the threshold of the cave, his heavy wooden spear resting lightly in his calloused hand. He does not plunge immediately into the deep snow. He waits. He allows his eyes to adjust to the staggering brightness of the snowfield, and he lets the absolute silence of the morning settle over his senses. He is listening to the mountain. In this environment, survival is not about speed, it is about perfect, motionless observation. The high-altitude air carries sound for miles. He listens for the sharp crack of ice shifting on the distant glaciers, the low, hollow whoomp of settling snow that might signal an avalanche, or the faint, unmistakable clatter of hooves on loose stone. He is hunting the barrel, the blue sheep of the Himalayas. The blue sheep are not truly blue, nor are they entirely sheep. They are a perfectly adapted evolutionary bridge between a sheep and a goat, designed to cling to the most precipitous, vertical rock faces on the planet. Their coats are a dense, slate grey, tinged with a subtle, slate blue hue that makes them completely invisible against the shadowy limestone cliffs of the Baishiya Formation. They are the ghosts of the high rock, capable of standing on ledges no wider than a human hand 300 feet above the valley floor. For the Denisovans, the barrel are the difference between life and starvation. 60% of all the animal bones that will eventually be pulled from the dust of the Baishiya Cave belong to these cliff-dwelling acrobats. They are the primary source of the rich, heavy fat necessary to survive the brutal cold, and their thick, double-layered coats provide the impenetrable hides that keep the family warm through the long nights. The Denisovan hunter does not look for the sheep on the flat, snowy plains of the basin. The barrel know that the open ground is dangerous. There, they are vulnerable to the massive, terrifying predators of the Pleistocene, the ancient snow leopards, and the enormous, high-altitude wolves that patrol the steppes. Instead, the sheep remain anchored to the vertical world. They graze on the sparse, tough lichens and frozen mosses that cling to the sheer rock faces, always keeping the safety of the extreme heights within a few desperate leaps. The hunter turns his gaze upward. He scans the towering, pale limestone cliffs that flank the cave entrance. He is not looking for the shape of an animal. He is looking for a disruption in the pattern of the stone. He is looking for a shadow that is slightly too dark, or a patch of slate grey that seems to detach itself infinitesimally from the rock wall. He spots them high above the valley floor, perhaps 200 feet up a sheer, almost featureless vertical face. A small herd of barrel is moving. They are a smudge of slate grey against the pale rock, moving with an agonizingly slow, deliberate grace. The morning sun has not yet reached them. They are still entirely in shadow, navigating a microscopic ledge with impossible precision. The hunt begins. But it is not a chase. It is a slow, methodical game of geometric positioning. The Denisovan cannot climb the sheer face to reach them. He cannot run them down on the flat ground. He must use the landscape against them. He must predict their movement along the cliff bands and place himself in the exact location where their path intersects with the broken scree slopes below. He begins to move. Despite his massive, heavy build of physique that looks designed for wrestling bears rather than stalking, his movement is incredibly fluid and entirely silent. He does not step on the dry, frozen stalks of steeper grass. He places his bare, heavily collosed feet onto the exposed patches of wind-scarred rock, absorbing his own weight with thick, powerful thighs. He moves parallel to the cliff face, staying low, keeping his silhouette broken by the massive boulders that have tumbled from the heights millennia ago. He is a master of dead, ground the invisible valleys and depressions in the landscape that hide him from the sharp, rectangular pupils of the blue sheep far above. The stalking takes hours. The sun finally crests the eastern ridges of the Ganges Basin, flooding the valley with a blinding and cold, golden light. The temperature rises only slightly, but the light changes everything. It throws the jagged topography of the cliffs into sharp relief, casting deep, ink-black shadows behind every outcrop of limestone. The hunter uses these shadows. He moves from dark patch to dark patch, a slow, creeping phantom of the Ice Age. He breathes through his nose, his mouth closed to prevent the thick plumes of white mist from betraying his position. He is completely focused, his mind empty of everything except the geometry of the rock, the direction of the freezing wind, and the slow, downward trajectory of the herd. The barrel are descending. The sun has warmed a lower band of the cliff, softening a patch of frozen lichen. They are moving cautiously down a steep, broken couloir, a chute of loose, jagged rock that funnels down toward the basin floor. This is the ambush point. The Denisovan reaches the base of the couloir long before the sheep. He finds a massive slab of fallen limestone, a piece of the mountain that cracked and fell during a long-forgotten earthquake. He presses his back against the freezing stone. He wraps his heavy wolf skin cloak tightly around his shoulders, breaking his outline, turning himself into just another shadow among the rocks. He grips his heavy wooden spear. He checks the blackened, fire-hardened point with his thumb. It is lethal. He rests the shaft against his thick thigh and settles into perfect, absolute stillness. He does not twitch. He does not brush the frost from his eyebrows. He slows his heart rate, breathing in a long, shallow rhythm that perfectly mimics the stillness of the stone he is leaning against. He becomes a part of the Baishiya Karst formation. He waits. The concept of time dissolves. In the modern world, waiting is often an anxious, frustrating experience filled with the desire for immediate resolution. For the Denisovan hunter, waiting is simply a state of being. It is the natural rhythm of the mountain. He is as patient as the ice slowly grinding down the distant valleys. High above, the soft clack-clack of hooves on loose stone echoes down the couloir. The sound is incredibly faint, muffled by the vast open air, but to the hunter it is as loud as thunder. The herd is moving down the chute. They are cautious. The lead ewe, an older, experienced female, pauses every few steps to sniff the wind. The wind is blowing down the mountain, carrying her scent to the hunter, but carrying his scent away into the vast emptiness of the basin. The trap is perfect. The clack-clack of hooves grows louder. Small showers of pebbles and loose dust cascade down the steep rock face, pinging softly against the boulders below. The Denisovan does not look up. He keeps his eyes focused on the ground immediately in front of his hiding place. Looking up risks catching the sunlight in his dark eyes, a flash of reflection that would instantly scatter the herd back up the vertical walls. He listens to their approach. He visualizes their position based entirely on the sound of falling rock. 50 yards, 30 yards, 20 yards. The lead ewe steps off the steep rock of the Kuluwai and onto the slightly flatter, broken ground near the base of the cliff. She is a magnificent animal, her thick slate grey coat practically glowing in the cold morning sun. She lowers her head to pull at a frozen tuft of grass. Behind her, a young, heavy-bodied male steps down from the rock. He is plump with the rich fat of the late autumn grazing, his curved horns sweeping back from his skull. He pauses, completely unaware, standing perfectly broadside to the massive slab of limestone just 15 feet away. The Denisovan does not hesitate. The explosion of movement is terrifyingly fast, a sudden, violent release of the immense, coiled energy he has been holding for hours. He steps out from the shadow of the rock. In a single and fluid, devastating motion, he brings his thick right arm back and drives the heavy wooden spear forward. The power generated by his massive chest and heavy bones is staggering. The fire-hardened point strikes the young male barrel precisely behind the shoulder blade, driving deep into the vitals. The sound of the impact is a dull, heavy thud, immediately followed by the sharp, chaotic clatter of hooves as the rest of the herd erupts in absolute panic. They do not run out into the basin, they instantly pivot and explode back up the near vertical face of the Kuluwai, bounding up the jagged rock with impossible, desperate agility. Within seconds, they are 50 feet high, leaping from microscopic ledge to microscopic ledge, disappearing back into the safety of the towering cliffs. But the young male does not follow. He takes 2 staggering steps, his legs buckling under the massive trauma of the strike, and collapses onto the snow-dusted rocks. The hunt is over. The Denisovan lowers his arm. The sudden, violent burst of adrenaline slowly drains from his heavy muscles. He does not shout in triumph. He does not celebrate. He approaches the fallen animal with a profound, quiet respect. He kneels in the snow beside the barrel. He places a thick, calloused hand on the animal's slate-grey flank, feeling the last, fading warmth of its life. He understands the brutal economy of the plateau for his family to survive the deep freeze of the Pleistocene winter. This animal had to fall. There is no malice in the act, only the harsh, beautiful reality of the food chain. He pulls the spear free. The work that follows is not a frantic butchering, but a slow and meticulous and highly skilled dismantling. Every single part of the blue sheep is vital. Nothing will be wasted. He reaches to his waist and pulls a heavy, beautifully chipped stone hand axe from a fold in his furs. The edge of the stone is razor-sharp, flaked from a core of high-quality chert, found miles away in a dry riverbed. With practiced, surgical precision, he begins to remove the hide. He works slowly, ensuring he does not puncture the thick, double-layered skin. This hide is not just clothing, it is life. Once it is scraped clean and smoked over the cavern fire, it will become the barrier that keeps the freezing wind away from the sleeping child. He separates the massive quarters of dark, rich meat. He carefully removes the thick layers of pure, white fat, the most valuable prize of the hunt. The fat will be rendered down in the brass bowl of a future monk's ancestors, but for the Denisovans, it will be eaten directly or smeared on their skin to protect against the biting wind. He cracks the long bones with a heavy rock, exposing the incredibly nutrient-dense marrow inside. Even the sinews are saved, carefully stripped from the muscle to be dried and used as incredibly strong cordage for tying garments or hafting new spears. The sun moves slowly across the pale blue sky, tracking its low winter arc over the Ganges basin. The Denisovan works steadily through the morning, surrounded by the absolute silence of the mountain. By the time he is finished, the heavy quarters of meat and the thick hide are bundled together, tied securely with strips of raw sinew. The load is massive. A modern human would struggle to lift even a portion of it. But the Denisovan simply crouches down, slips his thick arms through the loops of sinew, and heaves the entire bloody bundle onto his broad, incredibly powerful back. He adjusts the weight, leaning forward slightly to balance the load against his center of gravity. His thick legs flex, absorbing the immense pressure. He turns away from the blood-stained snow and looks back toward the pale limestone cliffs. High above, near the dark, gaping mouth of the Baishiya Karst Cave, a thin, faint wisp of grey wood smoke is twisting slowly into the freezing air. It is a beacon. It is the smell of safety, of warmth, of his family waiting by the embers. The hunt is successful. The long night has been pushed back a little further. He begins the slow, heavy walk back up the scree slope, his bare feet crunching rhythmically in the snow, carrying the life of the mountain back into the dark sanctuary of the earth. The heavy, calloused feet of the Denisovan hunter press rhythmically into the snow as he climbs the long, steep scree slope back toward the Baishiya Karst Cave. The massive weight of the blue sheep rests solidly against his broad back, a bundle of raw survival wrapped tightly in its own thick hide. With every step, he is carrying life back into the dark sanctuary of the limestone. As he approaches the massive, dark mouth of the cavern, the scent of the hearth fire grows stronger. It is a rich, complex aroma of burning juniper branches and the deep, earthy smell of old wood smoke clinging to the stone walls. It is the smell of his family, waiting in the warmth. He steps over the threshold, moving from the blinding, freezing white of the Pleistocene afternoon into the deep, welcoming shadows of the cave vestibule. The sudden shift in acoustics wraps around him like a heavy blanket, muting the low, constant hum of the wind sweeping across the Ganges basin. Inside the main chamber, the fire is burning brightly. The female is tending to the flames, feeding them small, dry twigs. The child is awake, sitting near the warmth, watching the dancing orange light with wide, dark eyes. The hunter lowers the heavy bundle of meat and hide to the hard-packed earth floor with a dull, satisfying thud. He does not speak, but the tension in the cave instantly dissolves. The immediate future is secure. The brutal, freezing nights ahead will be met with full stomachs and the thick, impenetrable warmth of a newly cured pelt. For the Denisovans, this cycle of hunting and feeding and returning to the fire is not merely a struggle, it is a profound, rhythmic harmony with the mountain. They are not fighting the Tibetan Plateau, they are flowing with it. They understand the deep, slow breathing of the seasons. And so, they live. They live in this cave not for a few seasons or a few lifetimes. They live here for an incomprehensible expanse of time. Imagine the passing of generations in this dark, quiet space. Watch as the child near the fire grows into a massive, powerful adult, learning to read the wind, and stalk the blue sheep on the sheer limestone cliffs. Watch as the older hunters slowly lose their strength, their heavy bones aching with the deep chill of the Ice Age, eventually passing into the profound silence of the earth. Watch as new fires are built, new hides are scraped, and new voices echo softly against the cavern ceiling. This cycle repeats itself not hundreds of times, but tens of thousands of times. The Denisovans occupy the Baishiya Karst Cave for over 100 millennia. It is a tenure of such immense duration that it dwarfs the entirety of recorded human history. It is a residency so long that the very shape of the earth outside the cave mouth slowly changes. The massive, slow-moving glaciers of the Middle Pleistocene gradually grind their way down the valleys, carving deep, U-shaped scars into the bedrock, and then slowly and agonizingly retreat as the global climate subtly shifts. The vast, sweeping grasslands of the basin turn from deep, vibrant green in the brief summers to an endless, unbroken white in the crushing winters, over and over and over again. But inside the cave, the changes are microscopic. They are the slow, relentless accumulation of dust. Every time a Denisovan family builds a fire, a tiny layer of fine, grey ash settles onto the hard, packed earth floor. Every time a hunter returns from the freezing slopes, a few grains of wind-blown loess dust fall from his heavy furs. Every time an animal bone is cracked for marrow and discarded in the dark corners of the chamber, it is slowly, imperceptibly covered by the falling earth. This process is so slow it is entirely invisible to the naked eye. It is the quiet, patient work of deep time. Over 100,000 years, the floor of the cave slowly rises. The original, hard-packed limestone bedrock is buried under feet of soft, powdery sediment. The ashes of 10,000 campfires, the microscopic fragments of chipped flint, the discarded bones of countless blue sheep, and the subtle, invisible traces of the Denisovans themselves are all slowly entombed in the dust. And then, and eventually, the fires stop burning. We do not know exactly why or how the Denisovans left the Baishiya Karst Cave. The archaeological record does not provide a sudden, dramatic conclusion. There is no evidence of a massive catastrophe, no sign of a desperate last stand against the elements. The end of their profound residency on the roof of the world appears to be a quiet fading away. Perhaps the climate shifted too dramatically, pushing the tree line further down the mountains and making the vital firewood impossible to find. Perhaps the herds of blue sheep migrated to different, inaccessible cliff faces. Or perhaps, as the millennia stretched on, they simply moved on, following the slow, inevitable pull of wandering that beats deep within the heart of every human lineage. Whatever the reason, a day finally comes when the hearth in the main chamber is not relit. The embers cool from bright orange to dull crimson, to deep purple, and finally to cold, grey ash. The thick, heavy hides are gathered up. The wooden spears are carried out into the pale morning light, and the massive, heavy-boned figures step over the threshold for the last time. They walk down the steep scree slope, their bare feet leaving shallow impressions in the fresh snow, heading out across the vast, sweeping expanse of the Ganges basin, slowly disappearing into the endless white distance. They leave the cave to the silence. The Baishiya Karst returns to the absolute, unbroken dark. The wind continues to howl outside, but there is no one left to listen. The only sound inside the cavern is the slow, rhythmic drip, drip, drip of mineral-rich water falling from the ceiling, a sound that measures out the passing centuries in tiny, cold droplets. The dust continues to fall. The wind blowing across the basin carries fine, powdery silt into the cave mouth, where it settles softly over the cold ash of the final hearth. The earth slowly draws a blanket over the past. It covers the scattered fragments of flint. It covers the broken bones of the blue sheep. And, in a quiet, forgotten alcove near the back of the chamber, it covers a single and massive, incredibly heavy human jawbone, slowly burying it in the soft, grey dark. The jawbone rests in the dust. The water from the ceiling drips onto its massive teeth, slowly building a thick, white carbonate crust, locking the ancient bone in a tomb of stone. The phantoms are gone. Millennia pass. The Pleistocene ends. The great glaciers retreat for the final time. The world warms, the oceans rise, and Homo sapiens, our own restless, endlessly curious ancestors, begin to spread across the globe. The modern humans eventually find their way up to the Tibetan Plateau. They are a different kind of survivor. They do not have the massive, heat-conserving bodies or the raw, heavy-boned strength of the Denisovans. But they bring with them complex languages, intricate tools, and a deep, driving need to understand the spiritual architecture of the world. They find the towering limestone cliffs of the Baishiya Formation. They stand before the dark mouth of the cave, feeling the profound, ancient silence radiating from the stone. They do not know who lived here before them. The dust has completely hidden the hearths and the bones. To the modern humans, the cave is not an abandoned home, it is an empty sanctuary. It is a place of deep power, a natural temple carved into the roof of the world. They string colourful prayer flags across the entrance, letting the snapping fabric carry their hopes out onto the freezing wind. They bring small, brass bowls filled with yak butter, lighting tiny, steady amber flames to push back the darkness. They kneel on the soft, powdery dust, their knees resting directly above the buried ashes of prehistoric fires, and they chant their low, resonant prayers. The spiritual and the prehistoric occupy the exact same space, separated only by a few feet of soft, grey earth and 160,000 years of time. This beautiful, silent coexistence continues for centuries. The monks meditate. The prayer wheels spin. The heavy jawbone waits in the dark until a single monk brushing the floor with his cold fingers finally pulls it into the light in 1980. But even after the jawbone is taken away to the warm drawer of the living Buddha, and eventually to the bright lights of the Lanzhou laboratory, the earth of the Baishiya cave still holds a profound secret. The jawbone was only a single, solid piece of the puzzle. It proved the Denisovans were there. But the true scale of their residency, the mind-boggling fact that they lived in the cavern for over 100,000 years, is not written in stone. It is written in the mud. Decades after the monk finds the jawbone, long after Dr. Dongjujang confirms its Denisovan origins, a new generation of scientists returns to the Baishiya Karst Cave. They do not come looking for more bones. They understand that, in the harsh, fluctuating environment of a high-altitude cave, large fossils are incredibly rare. They come looking for ghosts trapped in the dirt. They bring with them a technology that the monks and the early archaeologists could never have imagined, the ability to extract environmental DNA directly from the sediment of the cave floor. It is a process of almost magical scientific deduction. Every living creature constantly sheds microscopic traces of itself into the environment. We leave behind tiny flakes of skin, stray hairs, and the microscopic cellular debris of our daily existence. For the Denisovans, living in the enclosed space of the cave for millennia, this shedding was continuous. As they scraped the hides, as they slept by the fire, as they simply breathed in the dark, they were slowly, invisibly salting the earth with their own genetic code. When the dust settled over the floor, it trapped these microscopic fragments of DNA in the cold, dark sediment. Because the temperature inside the cave remained relatively stable, deep within the layers of earth, the DNA did not entirely shatter. It degraded, breaking into tiny, fragile strands, but it survived. The modern scientists do not dig with heavy shovels. They use tiny, sterile trowels. They wear protective suits and masks to ensure their own modern DNA does not contaminate the ancient earth. They carefully excavate small, vertical columns of dirt, moving down through the layers of sediment like moving backward through the pages of a deeply buried book. They take these samples of mud back to heavily filtered, pressurized laboratories. They wash the dirt with specialized chemical solutions, dissolving the minerals and isolating the microscopic, fragile strands of genetic material. They feed this invisible harvest into massive, humming sequences, and from the cold, grey dust of the Baishiya Cave, the ghosts rise again. The scientists find the DNA of the blue sheep, proving what the Denisovans hunted. They find the DNA of ancient hyenas and wolves, proving who prowled the basin outside. But most importantly, they find the DNA of the Denisovans themselves. And they do not just find it in one layer. They find it deep in the sediment, dating back 100,000 years. They find it higher up, dating back 60,000 years. They find it in the layers near the surface, dating back only 45,000 years. The dirt itself is a calendar, and the Denisovans are written on almost every page. The realization is profoundly humbling. The heavy jawbone was not an anomaly. It was not the remains of a single, lost wanderer who stumbled into the cave and died. The Baishiya Karst Cave was the capital of a quiet, enduring empire of ice and stone. It was a generational home, occupied continuously through the rise and fall of massive glaciers, long before the first modern human ever looked up at the stars. The Denisovans were the true lords of the high altitude. They mastered the freezing wind. They conquered the thin, oxygen-starved air. They found a way to thrive where others would have quickly perished. But as we marvel at their incredible endurance, a final, profound question remains. If they were so perfectly adapted to this brutal world, if they were so strong and so resilient, why did they vanish? If you look closely at the genetic code pulled from the dust, and if you look closely at the blood flowing through the veins of the modern people who now walk the sweeping grasslands of the Tibetan Plateau, you will find a breathtaking answer. The Denisovans did not entirely vanish. They did not simply fade away into the freezing dark. They left something behind. A gift, an invisible piece of their own profound resilience, passed down through the millennia, hiding in plain sight. The deep past is a landscape of ghosts. When we look back at the sprawling human family tree, we see dozens of branches that have withered and broken off, plunging into the dark abyss of extinction. We see the heavy-browed Neanderthals of Europe slowly retreating before the advancing tide of modern humanity. We see the small, isolated hobbits of the Indonesian island of Flores, vanishing as the climate shifted, and we see the Denisovans, those massive, quiet survivors of the freezing Asian steppes, slowly fading from the fossil record until only a few scattered bones remain. It is easy to assume that extinction is an absolute end, a sudden, silent cessation of a lineage. But the Denisovans did not face a sudden, silent end. The story of the Baishiya Karst Cave and the story of the Tibetan Plateau itself reveals a far more beautiful and complex truth. They did not simply vanish into the freezing dust of the Pleistocene. They achieved something far more profound. They became part of us. To understand how this happened, we must look away from the petrified stone of the jawbone and the microscopic fragments of DNA pulled from the cave dirt. We must look at the living, breathing people who call the roof of the world their home today. We must look at the nomadic herders moving their yaks across the Ganges basin. We must look at the monks spinning their copper prayer wheels in the thin, freezing air. We must look at the biology of breathing. At 3,200 meters above sea level, the air is thin. The atmospheric pressure is significantly lower than it is at sea level, which means that every time you take a breath, you are pulling in far fewer oxygen molecules. If you take a person whose ancestors have lived near the ocean for millennia and place them on the sweeping grasslands of the Tibetan Plateau, their body will immediately panic. It is a terrifying, deeply physiological reaction to the sudden lack of vital fuel. The heart begins to race, pounding frantically against the ribs in an attempt to circulate whatever oxygen it can find. The lungs heave, pulling in rapid, shallow breaths that feel empty and unfulfilling. This is acute mountain sickness. If this low-altitude person remains on the plateau, their body will try to compensate. The kidneys will detect the low oxygen levels and release a hormone called erythropoietin, or EPO. This hormone commands the bone marrow to produce massive amounts of red blood cells, the microscopic vehicles that carry oxygen through the bloodstream. In theory, this is a brilliant survival mechanism. More red blood cells mean more oxygen can be transported to the starving muscles and the brain. But there is a deadly flaw in this design. As the body produces more and more red blood cells, the blood itself begins to thicken. It loses its fluid, watery consistency and becomes viscous, almost like syrup. This thick, heavy blood is incredibly difficult for the heart to pump. It strains the cardiovascular system, increasing the risk of blood clots and strokes, and a chronic, debilitating condition known as mountain sickness, where the heart simply cannot push the sludge like blood through the vessels anymore. For a low-altitude human, long-term survival at extreme altitudes is a constant, exhausting battle against their own thickening blood. But the people of the Tibetan Plateau do not fight this battle. They move across the freezing steppes with effortless grace. They climb the steep, broken scree slopes without gasping for air. The monks sit for hours in deep, unbroken meditation, their breathing slow and rhythmic, and perfectly calm. They are not struggling. They are thriving. For decades, modern science marveled at the incredible endurance of the Tibetan people. How did they do it? How did they survive the thin air without their blood turning to dangerous sludge? The answer lies hidden deep within their genetic code. When scientists began to sequence the genomes of modern Tibetans, they found something extraordinary. They found a specific, highly unusual mutation in a gene known as EPAS1. The EPAS1 gene is a master regulator of the body's response to oxygen. It is the molecular switch that tells the body when to panic and start churning out massive amounts of red blood cells. In almost every human population on Earth, this switch flips on when oxygen levels drop. It is a universal human trait, but in the Tibetan population, the EPAS1 gene is different. It is broken, but broken in a brilliant, life-saving way. The mutation prevents the switch from flipping. When a Tibetan person breathes the thin, high-altitude air of the Ganges basin, their body does not panic. It does not flood their bloodstream with dangerous, thickening red blood cells. Their blood remains thin and fluid and easily pumped by the heart. Instead of trying to force more oxygen through brute biological force, their bodies have adapted to use the sparse oxygen they do have with incredible, superhuman efficiency. They breathe slightly faster, their blood vessels dilate to allow smoother flow, and their cells extract every possible molecule of vital air with perfect precision. It is the ultimate high-altitude adaptation. It is the reason they can call the roof of the world home. But the discovery of this super-athlete gene presented scientists with a massive problem. Evolution is a slow, agonizing process. For a beneficial mutation like the Tibetan EPAS1 gene to naturally occur, spread through a population, and become a dominant trait, it usually takes tens of thousands, perhaps hundreds of thousands of years of constant, brutal natural selection. Yet, archaeological evidence suggested that Homo sapiens modern humans had only permanently settled the extreme altitudes of the Tibetan Plateau relatively recently in evolutionary terms, perhaps only within the last 10 or 20,000 years. There simply was not enough time for modern humans to evolve such a perfect, complex genetic defense against the thin air. The math did not work. The EPAS1 mutation appeared in the Tibetan population far too quickly. It was as if they had somehow acquired this incredible adaptation overnight. Where did it come from? The answer was sitting in the drawer of the living Buddha. It was resting on the grey felt mat in the Lanzhou laboratory. It was buried deep in the soft, powdery dust of the Baishiya Karst Cave. When Dr. Dongju Zhong and her colleagues finally matched the protein sequence of the heavy jawbone to the Denisovans, another group of geneticists made a stunning connection. They took the sequenced genome of the Denisovan pulled from the shattered pinky bone in Siberia and compared it to the genomes of modern human populations around the world. They were looking for overlaps. They were looking for places where the shadow lineage had intersected with our own. They found the EPPAS1 gene, the exact and specific, highly unusual mutation that allows modern Tibetans to breathe the thin air without their blood thickening did not evolve slowly in Homo sapiens. It evolved in the Denisovans. For over 100,000 years, the Denisovans lived and hunted and slept in the freezing, hypoxic environment of the Baishiya Karst Cave. They endured the brutal winters. They stalked the blue sheep on the sheer limestone cliffs. And over those countless millennia, their massive, heavy-boned bodies slowly, painstakingly adapted to the extreme altitude. Their genetic code twisted and shifted, forging the EPAS1 mutation, perfecting the ultimate biological tool for survival on the roof of the world. And then, tens of thousands of years later, as the climate shifted and the great glaciers retreated, the first bands of wandering Homo sapiens arrived on the Tibetan Plateau. They were modern humans. They were smart and adaptable and restless, but they were vulnerable. They were low-altitude creatures stepping into a freezing, breathless world. They would have struggled immediately. Their hearts would have pounded. Their blood would have thickened. They would have been at the absolute mercy of the mountain. But the plateau was not empty. The Denisovans were still there. The meeting of these two great lineages of humanity is lost to time. We do not know if it was peaceful or violent, if it happened near a warm hearth fire or out on the sweeping, wind-scarred steppes. We only know the profound, undeniable biological truth. They met, and they merged. The Denisovans and the modern humans interbred. In that merging, the Denisovans passed on the greatest gift they could possibly give to these new, struggling arrivals. They passed on the key to the mountain. They gave them the EPAS1 gene. This inheritance was an incredible evolutionary shortcut. The modern humans did not have to wait tens of thousands of years to slowly adapt to the thin air. They received the fully formed, perfectly engineered genetic tool from the masters of the high altitude who had already done the hard, brutal work of surviving the Ice Age. With the Denisovan EPAS1 gene now woven into their DNA, the modern humans could breathe. Their blood remained thin. Their hearts beat steadily. They could climb the scree slopes, build their nomadic camps, and eventually construct their towering stone monasteries. The Denisovans did not vanish. They simply dissolved into the flowing river of modern humanity. They gave us the strength to conquer the heights, and in return, they achieved a kind of immortality. Think about the profound, beautiful irony of the monk walking through the snow in the winter of 1980. He is wrapped in heavy maroon wool. He is walking through the freezing night, his boots crunching softly on the frozen steeper grass. He is carrying a heavy, petrified jawbone, the physical remains of a Denisovan wrapped securely against his chest. He is a modern human. But the blood pumping steadily through his veins, the heart that beats slowly and calmly in the thin mountain air, the very lungs that draw the freezing oxygen deep into his chest, they are all powered by the invisible ghost of the being he is carrying. The Denisovan is not just a heavy piece of stone resting in the monk's robes. The Denisovan is alive inside the monk. Every time the monk takes a slow, deep breath of the freezing air, he is using the Denisovan's gift. Every time the nomads drive their heavy yaks across the Ganges basin, they are using the Denisovan's gift. Every time a child is born on the roof of the world, capable of thriving at 3,200 meters above sea level, the Denisovans live again. The shadows dancing on the limestone walls of the Pleistocene cave were not extinguished. They simply stepped into the light of the present day, hiding in the very breath of the people who now call the Baishiya Karst Cave a sacred place. The deep past and the living present are not separated by 160,000 years. They are intimately, permanently tangled together in the microscopic spirals of DNA. This is the ultimate, quiet triumph of the Denisovans. They endured the deepest cold the earth could offer. They mastered the highest, most unforgiving landscapes. And when their time as a distinct lineage finally drew to a close, they did not fade into nothingness. They handed their strength to us, ensuring that as long as humans walk the sweeping grasslands of the Tibetan Plateau, the phantoms of the Ice Age will never truly be forgotten. They are the invisible architects of the mountain people. They are the quiet, breathing ghosts of the high altitude. The realization of what the EPAS1 gene truly means is a moment of profound scientific awe. It is the closing of a vast, invisible circle that spans 160,000 years. The heavy, petrified jawbone, the macro loop, that opened in the freezing dust of the Baishiya Karst Cave in 1980 is finally resolved. It is no longer just a curious fossil, and it is no longer just a piece of a vanished species. It is a mirror. When the scientists at Lanzhou University, and later the geneticists around the world, looked into the complex molecular structure of the jawbone, they were not just looking at the Denisovans, they were looking at the ancestors of the very people who had protected the bone for decades. To fully grasp the weight of this connection, we must return to the monk. Let us go back to that quiet winter night in 1980. The monk is walking across the sweeping, snow-covered expanse of the Ganges basin. He is carrying the jawbone wrapped securely in a scrap of rough maroon wool, resting heavy against his chest. He is a man of deep spiritual contemplation, moving through a landscape that feels ancient and unyielding. He does not know about DNA. He has never seen a mass spectrometer, and he has never heard the word Denisovan. He simply knows that the heavy stone he pulled from the dust of the sacred cave is important. He feels a quiet, unspoken reverence for the relic. But imagine, for a moment, if he could see the invisible steel threads connecting him to the heavy bone in his coat. Imagine if he could see the microscopic, twisting ladders of the EPAS1 gene, the exact same genetic sequence that once coded the dense, powerful muscles and the massive lungs of the Denisovan who owned that jawbone. Imagine if he could see that this ancient code is not just written in the petrified stone he carries, but is actively, continuously unwinding and rewriting itself inside his own living cells with every single heartbeat. As he walks through the freezing night, taking slow, deliberate breaths of the thin mountain air, his body is not panicking. His blood is not thickening into dangerous sludge. His heart is pumping smoothly, effortlessly distributing the scarce oxygen to his muscles. He is using the Denisovan's gift. The heavy bone resting against his chest is not a stranger. It is a deeply distant, ancient grandparent. The monk is carrying a physical piece of his own immense biological heritage. The Denisovan who watched the firelight dance on the limestone walls of the Baishiya Karst Cave 160,000 years ago is not dead. They are actively keeping the monk alive in the present moment. This is the beautiful, almost poetic harmony of the Baishiya discovery. It is a story where the sacred and the scientific do not collide, they perfectly align. For centuries, the Tibetan Buddhists have viewed the Baishiya Karst Cave as a holy place. They believe it is a nexus of spiritual energy, a place where the veil between the physical world and the divine is incredibly thin. They string prayer flags across the entrance to catch the wind, and they light butter lamps in the dark to honor the unseen forces of the mountain. They believe the cave is a sanctuary, and modern science has proven them absolutely right. The cave is a sanctuary. But it is not just a sanctuary of the spirit, it is a sanctuary of human survival. For over 100,000 years, those thick limestone walls provided the exact physical shelter needed for a branch of humanity to endure the most brutal climate shifts in Earth's history. It was the warm, dark one where the EPAS1 gene was forged in the fires of the Ice Age. The reverence the monks feel for the cave is entirely justified. The mountain gave them life. The mountain, and the phantoms who lived within it, gave them the biological tools to become the people of the plateau. When the 6th Gangthang Rinpoche, the living Buddha, took the heavy jawbone from the monk and placed it gently into the dark walnut, drawer-lined with faded yellow silk, he was performing an act of profound, intuitive wisdom. He did not know the science, but he understood the gravity of the object. He knew it belonged to the deep past, and he knew it needed to be protected until the modern world was ready to understand its true nature. He offered it a warm, quiet resting place, honouring the ancient being just as the Denisovans had honoured the quiet warmth of their own hearth fires. The jawbone waited in that drawer for decades, a silent bridge between the prehistoric hunters of the Pleistocene and the humming laboratories of the 21st century. It was the physical anchor that allowed us to finally see the faces of the phantoms. And now that the story of the Baishiya Karst Cave is known, the way we look at the Tibetan Plateau must change forever. It is no longer just a vast, empty wilderness of rock and ice, occasionally dotted with the colourful tents of nomadic herders. It is a massive, living monument to human endurance. Every sweeping valley, every jagged limestone cliff, every frozen stalk of steeper grass is imbued with the deep, silent memory of the Denisovans. If you were to travel to Shire County today, you would see the modern world encroaching on the edges of the Ganges Basin. There are paved roads now. There are power lines stringing across the valleys, and the sharp, rectangular shapes of modern buildings rising in the distance. The absolute, unbroken isolation that the monk experienced in 1980 is slowly fading. But the Baishiya Karst Cave remains. It still sits at the base of the towering, pale limestone cliffs, a dark, gaping mouth looking out over the roof of the world. The modern pilgrims still come. They walk up the steep, rocky paths, their breath pluming white in the freezing air. They wear heavy coats, some of them brightly coloured synthetic fabrics that the Denisovans could never have imagined. But beneath the modern clothing, their bodies are exactly the same. Their chests rise and fall in the slow, rhythmic cadence dictated by the EPAS1 gene. They arrive at the cave entrance. The prayer flags snap in the wind, a chaotic, vibrant flutter of red and blue and yellow and green and white against the stark grey stone. The pilgrims step over the threshold, moving from the bright, harsh light of the plateau into the deep, welcoming shadows of the vestibule. They do not know that they are walking into the prehistoric living room of their ancient cousins. They light their small brass butter lamps. The tiny, perfectly still amber flames push back the darkness, casting soft, warm light against the rough limestone walls. The smell of melting yak butter and sweet sandalwood incense fills the air, mingling with the deep, earthy scent of ancient dust and cold stone. They kneel on the soft, powdery floor of the cavern. They close their eyes. They begin to chant. The sound of their chanting is low and resonant and incredibly deeply pitched. It is a continuous, looping vibration that seems to emanate not just from their throats, but from the massive, heavy-boned architecture of the mountain itself. The acoustic properties of the cave amplify the sound, turning a few quiet voices into a powerful, rolling wave of spiritual energy that washes over the dark stone. Om Mani Padme Hum. The mantra echoes through the chamber. It drifts over the spot where the Denisovan hearth fire once burned brightly, turning the glacial night into a warm, safe haven, it rolls over the exact patch of soft, grey dust where the monk's cold fingers brushed against the heavy, petrified jawbone. It sinks deep into the sediment, vibrating against the microscopic, shattered strands of ancient DNA that still lie buried in the dark earth. The chanting and the prehistoric silence do not clash. They blend together into a single, profound symphony of human existence. The pilgrims are praying to the divine, seeking peace and understanding and connection to the vast, unseen forces of the universe. And beneath their knees, separated only by a few feet of soft earth and 160,000 years of time, the Denisovans are resting. The ancient hunters who stalked the blue sheep, the women who scraped the heavy hides, the children who slept warmly by the glowing embers, they are all still there, woven into the very fabric of the cave. This is the ultimate resolution of the story. The macro loop is closed. The mystery of the heavy stone found in the dust is no longer a mystery. It is a testament to the unbreakable, sprawling web of humanity. We are not separate from the deep past. We do not simply replace the people who came before us, we absorb them. We carry their triumphs, their adaptations, and their quiet, enduring strength within our own bodies. As the pilgrims continue to chant in the warm, amber light of the butter lamps, the modern world outside the cave feels incredibly distant. The hum of traffic, the glow of screens, the relentless, frantic pace of the 21st century, all of it fades away, muffled by the sheer, imposing mass of the limestone cliffs. Inside the cavern, time slows down. The frantic ticking of the clock is replaced by the slow, deep breathing of the earth. The connection between the modern Tibetan people and the ancient Denisovans is a reminder that we are far more resilient, far more deeply rooted in the natural world than we often realize. When we face the harsh, freezing winters of our own lives, whether they are physical challenges or the internal storms of the modern mind, we are not facing them alone. We are drawing on the strength of the phantoms. We are using the biological tools forged in the deepest, darkest cold of the Pleistocene. We are breathing the air that they breathed. We are standing on the ground that they walked. The Baishiya Karst Cave is not just an archaeological site. It is a monument to the quiet, unyielding power of life. It is proof that humanity does not just survive the Ice Age, we find a way to make the ice our home. We find a way to light a fire in the dark, to wrap ourselves in the warmth of the mountain, and to pass our strength down through the endless, unseen generations. The jawbone has told its story. The ghost DNA has spoken from the mud. The science has confirmed what the monks have always known intuitively: this place is sacred. And as the chanting of the pilgrims slowly begins to fade, echoing softly into the deep, unexplored tunnels at the back of the cavern, the story of the Denisovans does not end, it simply transitions. It moves from the realm of scientific discovery back into the quiet, peaceful rhythm of the mountain. The heavy stone is safely preserved in a museum now, protected from the elements. But the true legacy of the Denisovans is not locked in a glass case. Their legacy is out there on the sweeping, snow-covered grasslands of the Ganges Basin. It is in the deep, slow breaths of the nomadic herders. It is in the effortless grace of the blue sheep, clinging to the sheer limestone cliffs. It is in the very wind that howls across the roof of the world. The phantoms are at peace. They have done their work. They have given us the mountain. And now, as the long day draws to a close, and the pale blue light of the Tibetan evening begins to seep into the mouth of the Baishiya Karst Cave once more, it is time for the world to rest. It is time to let the profound, heavy silence of deep time wash over the present moment, settling the dust, quieting the mind, and guiding us toward the deep, restorative dark. To understand the profound peace that rests over the Baishiya Karst Cave today, we must listen to the resonance of two distinct timelines, separated by 160,000 years, playing the exact same chord. If you were to stand at the threshold of the cavern right now, in the fading indigo light of a Tibetan twilight, you would not see a clash between the ancient and the modern. You would see a perfect, seamless superimposition. The landscape has absorbed the deep past so completely that the ghosts of the Pleistocene and the living breath of the present day move together, like two rivers merging into a single, quiet ocean. Let your mind drift back to the monk in the winter of 1980. He is kneeling in the soft, grey dust of the cave floor. His cold fingers are tracing the earth, his breathing slow and rhythmic. The tiny, perfect teardrop of the butter lamp illuminates the rough limestone walls, pushing back the overwhelming dark. Now, look through that exact same physical space, but look back 160 millennia. In the very same spot where the monk kneels, a massive, heavy-boned Denisovan female is sitting on a thick sheepskin. She is tending to the glowing orange embers of the hearth fire. She reaches out with a calloused hand, her movements slow and deliberate, to adjust the heavy furs covering a sleeping child. The light illuminating the cave wall is different. The chaotic, dancing orange of the wood fire versus the steady, calm amber of the yak butter, but the shadow it casts is the same. It is the shadow of humanity, seeking warmth, seeking safety, finding sanctuary inside the immovable stone. The two timelines do not just mirror each other, visually they echo each other in the deep, sensory language of survival. When the modern monks chant their low, resonant mantras, the sound waves travel outward, rolling over the ancient sediment. Om Mani Padme Hum. The deep vibration of their voices sinks into the dust. It is a sound of devotion, of spiritual endurance. But if you listen beneath the chanting, you can hear the prehistoric echo. It is the slow, collective breathing of the Denisovan family sleeping around the embers. The deep, powerful draw of air into their massive lungs, the long, slow release that pushes white mist into the freezing night. Inhale, exhale, inhale, exhale. The rhythm of the chant and the rhythm of the prehistoric breath are identical. They are both born from the necessity of pacing oneself against the thin, punishing air of the plateau. The EPAS1 gene, forged in the deep past, is the biological engine that allows the modern chant to exist. The Denisovans gave the monks the lungs to pray. And what of the scent? When the pilgrims light their offerings today, the cave fills with the heavy and sweet, intoxicating aroma of burning sandalwood and melting butter. It is a smell designed to calm the mind, to lower the heart rate, and to invite a state of meditative stillness. But deeply buried beneath the floorboards of the present, locked in the microscopic layers of ash and dirt, is the memory of another scent. It is the rich, earthy smell of burning juniper branches, of dry alpine scrub, and the dark smoke of animal fat dropping into hot coals. Both scents represent the exact same human triumph, the pushing back of the cold, the creation of a small and warm, controlled environment in a world that is vast and freezing and wildly unpredictable, the incense of the modern temple is simply the evolution of the Pleistocene hearth fire. They are both signals to the human brain that it is safe to close your eyes. It is safe to rest. The Baishiya Basin itself acts as a massive, sweeping stage for this beautiful, timeless play. Look out over the sweeping grasslands from the mouth of the cave. In the present day, you might see a solitary nomadic herder moving slowly across the basin floor. He is a small, dark shape against the endless expanse of white snow, draped in a heavy sheepskin coat, his face weathered by the harsh ultraviolet light of the high altitude. He is guiding a herd of massive, slow-moving yaks, listening to the deep, resonant snorts of the animals and the rhythmic crunch of their hooves breaking the crust of the snow. Now, blur your vision slightly. Let the timeline slip. The nomadic herder fades, replaced by the massive, silent silhouette of a Denisovan hunter. He is draped in the heavy fur of a Pleistocene wolf. He is moving across the exact same patch of snow, his thick, calloused feet pressing into the earth. He is not guiding yaks, he is stalking the ghosts of the high rock, the slate-grey barrel clinging to the towering limestone cliffs. The animals they follow are different, and the tools they carry are separated by millennia of innovation, but the relationship with the mountain is entirely unchanged. Both the modern nomad and the ancient hunter understand the brutal, beautiful economy of the plateau. They know that survival is not about conquering the environment, it is about absolute, humble submission to its rules. They know how to read the subtle shifts in the wind, how to find the dry grass buried beneath the frost, and how to wrap themselves in the thick hides of the animals that share their world. They are both lords of the high altitude. They are brothers, separated by time, but united by the blood pumping through their veins, kept thin and fluid by the invisible gift of the EPAS1 gene. Even the silence of the plateau is a shared experience. When the monk in 1980 walked back across the Baishiya Basin, carrying the heavy, petrified jawbone toward the monastery of the living Buddha, he was surrounded by a profound, unbroken quiet. The only sounds in the world were the rustle of his heavy maroon wool and the low, continuous howling of the winter wind. That silence is not empty. It is heavy with the weight of deep time. It is the exact same silence that the Denisovans listened to as they huddled around their dying fires. It is the silence of the great glaciers grinding down the valleys. It is the silence of the dust slowly falling over the cave floor, century after century, burying the past in soft, grey earth. When we stand in the modern world, surrounded by the constant, frantic noise of industry, of digital connection, of abstract anxieties, we crave that silence. We seek it out. We listen to the wind, or the rain, or the sound of a distant fire, because our brains are ancient. Our nervous systems were forged in the quiet, slow-moving world of the Pleistocene. The story of the Baishiya Karst Cave is a profound reminder that we belong to that quiet world. The heavy jawbone is not an anomaly. The ghost DNA in the mud is not just a scientific curiosity. They are proof that humanity is an incredibly resilient, deeply connected organism. We have survived ice ages. We have survived the crushing, oxygen-starved heights of the Tibetan Plateau. We have endured, and we did not endure by fighting the earth. We endured by listening to it. The Denisovans listened to the mountain, and the mountain gave them the strength to survive. The monks listened to the silence, and the silence gave them the space to understand the divine. The scientists listened to the microscopic echoes in the dirt, and the dirt gave them the true history of our species. As the light of the present day begins to fully fade from the Ganges basin, the transition into the long, dark night is a gentle, deeply comforting process. The sky above the towering limestone cliffs deepens from slate blue to a profound, velvety black. The first stars appear, burning with that cold, brilliant clarity unique to the extreme altitudes. They are the exact same stars that the Denisovans looked up at 160,000 years ago. The constellations have shifted slightly in the vast expanse of cosmic time, but the light is the same. It is the ancient, unblinking light of a universe that watches the slow rise and fall of humanity with absolute patience. Inside the Baishiya Karst Cave, the modern pilgrims have finished their prayers. The spinning copper wheels have slowly glided to a silent halt. The tiny amber flames of the butter lamps have burned down, leaving only the faintest wisp of sweet-smelling smoke twisting up into the dark ceiling. The monks gather their heavy robes and begin the slow, measured walk back down the scree slope toward their monasteries. They leave the cave exactly as they found it, quiet and undisturbed, and deeply at peace. The cavern returns to the dark. The wind outside begins its low, continuous hum, sweeping fresh, powdery snow across the footprints left by the pilgrims, slowly erasing the evidence of the present day. Inside the main chamber, the temperature stabilizes. The air is perfectly still. The soft, grey dust on the floor remains completely undisturbed. Beneath that dust, the microscopic fragments of Denisovan DNA rest quietly in the dark. The memory of the hearth fires, the scraped hides, and the heavy-boned hunters is perfectly preserved, locked in the earth, waiting for the slow, relentless passage of the next 100,000 years. The macro loop of human history, which opened with the first spark of flint in the Pleistocene and closed with the hum of the mass spectrometer in Lanzhou, is now resting softly in the mind. The story has been told. The phantoms have been honored. The modern world, with all its loud, fast-paced demands, feels entirely irrelevant here. The anxieties of tomorrow do not exist in the deep, resonant silence of the Baishiya Karst. There is only the mountain. There is only the rock, the wind, and the slow, continuous rhythm of breathing. As you lie in the quiet of your own space, listening to the echoes of the Tibetan Plateau, allow yourself to fully absorb the profound safety of this realization. You are the result of 160,000 years of endurance. You carry the strength of the Ice Age survivors in your very biology. The same deep, unbreakable resilience that allowed the Denisovans to thrive in the freezing dark is resting quietly inside you. You do not need to fight the night. You do not need to worry about the cold. You can simply surrender to the slow, heavy gravity of deep time. You can let the tension melt from your muscles, just as the Denisovans let the fatigue of the hunt melt away by the glowing embers of their fire. You can let your breathing slow, matching the rhythmic, ancient cadence of the monks meditating in the dark. The mountain is standing guard. The limestone walls are thick and impenetrable. The wind is howling outside, but you are safe inside the sanctuary. It is time to let the story fade. It is time to let the sharp edges of the present world blur and soften, dissolving into the vast and sweeping, snow-covered landscape of the Ganges basin. The journey across the plateau is over. The heavy stone has been returned to the earth. The fire has burned down to embers, and the embers have cooled to ash. All that remains is the profound, unbroken peace of the ancient world. The last of the monks have departed. Their footsteps, soft and rhythmic against the hard, packed earth of the steep path, have faded entirely into the vast, sweeping expanse of the Ganges basin. The heavy maroon wool of their robes has disappeared into the freezing, velvet blackness of the high-altitude night. They have returned to the warmth of their sanctuaries, to their own quiet corners of the world, leaving the ancient stone behind. The Baishiya Karst Cave is alone once more. Inside the cavern, the transition back to absolute, prehistoric silence is agonizingly slow and incredibly beautiful. There is no sudden quiet. It is a gradual settling, a slow, heavy sinking of the atmosphere, as if the air itself is tired and simply wishes to rest. In the small alcove near the front of the main chamber, the final butter lamp is reaching the end of its life. The brass bowl is cold to the touch now. The block of golden yak butter has completely melted away, leaving only a shallow pool of clear, fragrant oil at the very bottom. The cotton wick, which has burned so steadily and so bravely against the crushing dark, is turning black. The tiny, amber teardrop of the flame begins to falter. It does not flicker with panic. It simply begins to lower, shrinking down, drawing its light inward. The shadows on the rough limestone walls, which have danced and swayed for hours, slowly begin to stretch and lengthen, creeping down the stone, reaching across the soft, grey powdery dust of the floor. The light softens from a bright, clear gold to a deep, bruised orange, and then to a faint, glowing red, with a sound so soft it is entirely imperceptible, a sound no louder than a single snowflake landing on a bed of dry grass. The flame finally separates from the wick. It hovers for a fraction of a millisecond, a tiny glowing ghost of heat, and then it is gone. The dark rushes in. It is not a frightening darkness. It is not an empty void. It is a heavy and thick, protective blanket of shadow. It is the original state of the universe, a profound and absolute blackness that wraps around the stone, the dust, and the deep past. From the extinguished wick, a single, incredibly thin thread of pale blue smoke rises into the unseen air. It twists slowly, curling back upon itself in complex, lazy spirals, carrying the sweet, heavy scent of the burnt butter up toward the invisible ceiling. The smoke lingers in the still air for a long time, a final, fading memory of light, before it too slowly dissipates into nothingness. The cavern is now perfectly, completely at rest. Outside, the Pleistocene wind and the modern wind are the exact same entity. The air moving across the Tibetan Plateau does not know what century it is. It only knows the geography of the stone and the freezing temperature of the upper atmosphere. The wind sweeps down from the distant, slow-moving glaciers. It carries the sharp, clean scent of ancient ice. It moves across the thousands of miles of sweeping grasslands, bending the frozen, frost-encased stalks of the steeper grass in long, continuous waves. As the wind reaches the towering, pale limestone cliffs of the Baishiya Formation, it loses its sharp edge. It strikes the massive, immovable face of the mountain and breaks, softening into a low and continuous morning hum. It is a sound that vibrates in the chest, a deep, resonant frequency that perfectly matches the resting heartbeat of the earth. Inside the cave mouth, the acoustics of the heavy stone catch this low hum and turn it into a lullaby. It is a muffled, distant ocean of sound, safely separated from the absolute stillness of the interior chamber. Listen to the wind. It is out there, in the freezing dark, but it cannot reach you here. You are entirely safe. You are surrounded by millions of tons of solid, unyielding limestone. The walls around you are several feet thick, anchored deep into the bedrock of the planet. They have stood here for millions of years. They have withstood the grinding force of the ice ages, the shifting of tectonic plates, and the slow, relentless passage of deep time. They will not move. They will not fail. They are holding the night at bay. The temperature inside the cavern is deeply cold, but it is a comfortable, preserving cold. It is a temperature that slows the decay of the world. It is the reason the heavy, petrified jawbone survived for 160,000 years. It is a cold that invites the body to draw its warmth inward, to curl into itself, to find a small, soft center of heat and protect it. Imagine that warmth now. Imagine the heavy, thick furs of the Denisovans, the soft, dense undercoat of the slate grey-blue sheep, perfectly cured by the smoke of a prehistoric hearth fire. Imagine the weight of that fur resting across your shoulders. It is incredibly heavy. The physical weight of it presses down on your muscles, a grounding, anchoring pressure that tells your nervous system it is time to stop moving. Let your shoulders drop beneath that imaginary weight. Let them sink down, pulling away from your neck. Release the tension that has been quietly holding you upright all day. There is nothing left to hold up. The mountain is holding you now. The floor beneath you is not hard. It is the soft and powdery grey sediment of the cave. It is the accumulated dust of 100,000 years. It is finer than sand, softer than ash. As you rest upon it, the dust gently yields to the shape of your body, creating a perfect, custom depression. You are sinking just a fraction of an inch into the deep past. You are resting exactly where the phantoms rested. Close your eyes to the absolute dark of the cavern. In your mind, look toward the center of the room. The butter lamp is gone, but beneath the layers of soft dust, there is another memory of heat. It is the prehistoric hearth. The massive, dancing flames have been out for tens of thousands of years. The wood is entirely consumed, but deep, deep down, in the microscopic architecture of the ash and the blackened river stones, there is a lingering phantom warmth. It is a deep, glowing crimson ember of history. Focus on that deep red glow. It is slow, it is steady, it does not flicker. It simply radiates a quiet, heavy heat. Let your breathing synchronize with the slow, steady glow of that ancient ember. Inhale. Draw the cool, perfectly still air of the cave into your lungs. Feel it moving through you, clean and untainted by the modern world. You are breathing the exact same air that filled the massive, powerful chests of the Denisovan hunters. Hold it for a moment. Feel the quiet suspension of time. There is no past. There is no future. There is only this single, suspended breath in the dark. Exhale. Release the air slowly, effortlessly. Let it flow out into the cavern, joining the invisible atmosphere of the deep past. With the breath, release the final, lingering remnants of the day's fatigue. Let it drain from your arms, from your hands, from the tips of your fingers, sinking down into the soft, grey dust. The Denisovans are sleeping all around you. You cannot see them in the blackness, but you can feel their immense, quiet presence. They are curled beneath their heavy wolf skins, their massive, heavy-boned bodies completely at rest. Listen closely. Beneath the muffled hum of the wind outside, there is another sound. It is the slow, collective breathing of the Ice Age family. It is a deep, resonant rhythm. The rise and fall of massive chests. The slow, powerful pumping of hearts that are perfectly adapted to the thin, high-altitude air. They are breathing for you. The invisible gift of the EPAS1 gene. The genetic ghost they left behind is quietly working in the background, keeping your blood thin, keeping your pulse steady, ensuring that you can rest peacefully on the roof of the world. You do not need to try to sleep. Sleep is not an action. It is a surrender. The Denisovans did not try to sleep. When the fire burned down to purple coals, they simply let go. They let the mountain take them. Let the mountain take you. Your legs are becoming heavy. The muscles in your calves, your thighs, your hips, they are turning to stone. They are becoming part of the limestone floor. They are sinking down into the soft, powdery sediment. They are completely relaxed. Your chest is heavy. The rhythm of your breathing is slowing down. It is stretching out. The pauses between each breath are growing longer and wider, more peaceful. Inhale, a slow, cool draw of the dark. Exhale, a long, warm release into the stone. The thoughts in your mind are beginning to thin. The sharp, frantic edges of modern anxieties cannot survive in the freezing, absolute silence of the Baishiya Karst Cave. The heavy stone walls block them out. They are too weak to penetrate the deep time of the Pleistocene. Your thoughts are becoming like the dust. Loose, drifting, unconnected. They float through your mind like tiny motes of ash catching the faint, unseen light before slowly and gently settling down onto the floor, joining the millions of other forgotten moments buried in the earth. The Ganges basin outside is vast and white and completely empty. The snow is falling softly now, millions upon millions of delicate, crystalline flakes, drifting down from the bruised purple sky, landing on the frozen grasses without a single sound. They are burying the tracks of the monks. They are burying the tracks of the yaks. They are burying the tracks of the ancient hunters. The snow is smoothing the world. It is making everything soft. It is making everything quiet. The glaciers high above are frozen solid. The rivers are locked in ice. The entire Tibetan Plateau is engaged in a profound, restorative slumber. You are at the very center of this sleeping world. In the dark of the cavern, the heavy, petrified jawbone rests in the dust. It is completely still. It requires nothing. It asks for nothing. It simply exists, a silent anchor holding the present to the past. The teeth are smooth. The bone is heavy. The crust of white carbonate is cold and hard. It is waiting for the morning, but the morning is thousands of years away. There is no rush. There is only the long and beautiful, unbroken night. The darkness behind your eyelids is exactly the same as the darkness of the cave. There is no separation. You have become part of the sanctuary. Your breathing is so slow now, so quiet. It matches the rhythm of the ancient earth. Inhale, the coolness of the mountain. Exhale, the warmth of the firs. The silence is absolute. The wind is a distant memory. The heavy stone is your blanket. The soft dust is your bed. The phantoms are resting. The mountain is at peace. You are safe. You are warm. You are drifting deeper into the sediment, deeper into the past. The thoughts fragment. The edges blur. The ember fades from crimson to black. The breath slows. The body sinks. The stone, the dust, the breath, the dark. Nothing left to carry. Nothing left to hold. Only the slow, quiet weight of the earth. only the silence of the plateau, only the deep restorative sleep of the ancient world. Sleep, sleep, sleep.